Chapter 1030. Peng Yeyu glanced at Li Su and said with a smile, I am the external envoy personally appointed by the sect leader. If I don't have a direct message from the sect leader, how can I be called an external envoy? If your Huiming Hall knows about it, wouldn't the sect leader? Peng Yeyu didn't finish his sentence. He turned to Dream and said, Miss Wuxia, get on the boat first. I'll send you to see the sect leader. Dream glanced at him, then glanced at Li Su. She calmly walked onto the boat. Li Su opened his mouth to stop her, but he raised his hand and put it down. Li, I'll go to your place to receive my punishment. My meridians are damaged, so my throat is naturally a problem. There's nothing strange about it. Peng Yeyu saw Dream walk to the side of the boat. He turned his head and said, Also tonight's password was set by Li himself, right? Li Su was somewhat baffled. He nodded and said, Yes. External Envoy Peng, is there something wrong? There's nothing wrong. It's excellent. It's just that if some people don't know how to be flirtatious, they shouldn't do such things. Li Su was furious. This is Yiyu Xiaoxiao's password, however. As soon as he said the password, he immediately understood. He looked at Peng Yeyu with a strange expression. Peng Yeyu cupped his hands and said, Li, I left the island first. The sect leader sent me a message, and I left the island in a hurry. The fragrant cult sent out 2 envoys. They only asked one about the fragrant cult situation, and didn't ask the other. If that Ren Xiaoyao is hiding something, it will be inappropriate for our sect's operation. Therefore, she asked me to bring Zixiao over. She has detailed information to ask. Li, are you satisfied? It's nothing. External emissary Peng has received the sect leader's verbal instructions, so of course he can do as he pleases. This old man was just asking, so don't take it to heart. Also, the tonight's password is really this old man's slip of the tongue. Brother, please don't blame me. This old man will have his subordinates change it. No, don't change it tonight. Let's talk about it tomorrow. Peng Yeyu hurriedly stopped him and said, I also didn't want to leave in such a hurry. So when I heard Mr. Li's command tonight, I felt a little unhappy. Forget it, we're just talking about the facts. I still have a lot of respect for Mr. Li. Wait for me to come back, then we'll have a toast. Well said. Well said. Li Su smiled and took out a jade bottle from his bosom. He handed it to Peng Yeyu and said, This is a pill that I obtained from the Dalan Temple. It's most suitable for external injuries. External emissary Peng. This throat injury is really not good. It's better to treat it as soon as possible. Peng Yeyu received the jade bottle and smiled. Thank you for your help, Mr. Li. He then jumped onto the boat and shouted, Hurry up and set sail. Before midnight, I want to get out of the pool. Yes, external emissary Peng. Don't worry, there won't be any problems. The man controlling the boat saw that even Mr. Li was letting them go. How could he not quickly redeem himself? When the boat was out of the water, Peng Yeyu clasped his hands and said, Mr. Li, rest early. When I come back, I'll thank you again. External emissary Peng, be careful on the road. Leave early and come back early. Li Su returned the gesture. His words were very warm. It made people feel that Shui Yuping's old and new disciples were getting along well. Looking at the boat leaving, Li Su stopped smiling and scolded, Look at all of you. What do you want me to say to all of you? Tonight's password, why didn't you remind me? You already used his name as the password. How could you not make him angry? Go, hurry up. Sai, forget it. If something like this happens in the future, you must tell me earlier. Then he looked up and whispered, This external disciple can be really arrogant sometimes. Li Su did not know that on the boat not far away, Peng Yeyu's back was already soaked. Even his forehead was slightly sweaty. At this moment he was brushing his forehead with his fingers and scolding. This old man, the man controlling the boat, heard him from afar. He lowered his head slightly and focused on controlling the boat. It was as if he did not hear him at all. Dream sat in the cabin. Her 2 big eyes stared at Peng Yeyu, full of curiosity. The way out between the clouds and the water was different from the way in. However, Peng Yeyu did not need to worry about it. He only needed to stand at the bow of the boat. With the face of the disciples between the clouds and the water familiar with him, and the password that made him a little angry, he was unimpeded. When the boat reached the shore, Peng Yeyu brought Dream down the boat. The man controlling the boat cupped his hands and said, "External emissary Peng, I will not see you off. I hope you will make a new contribution soon." As he said that, he docked the boat beside the pool. At this moment, the disciples who were patrolling the shore quickly rushed over. Since they were already on the shore, Peng Yeyu dealt with them even more smoothly. He sent the disciples away with a few words. He even sent Dream's big white horse over. Dream rode on the big white horse. Peng Yeyu also rode on a horse. The two of them walked for a while, and arrived at the top of the mountain. Looking at the sky, Peng Yeyu cupped his hands and said, "Miss Xixia, I will see you off here. From now on, Miss Xixia will have to go by herself." Wait. Dream was a little worried. "Young Master Peng sent me off under the pretext of your sect leader. If your sect leader asks about it in the future, how will young Master Peng answer? Why don't you follow me to the aroma cult? You will have a place to stay." "Thank you, Miss Xixia. This is just a deal with Ren Xiaoyao. I naturally have a way to escape." "Alright, it's getting late. Goodbye." Peng Yeyu obviously didn't want to say more. He patted his horse and went in another direction along the mountain. Dream looked at Peng Yeyu's back and waited for a while. She patted her horse and went in another direction. This was what she had discussed with Zhang Xiaohua earlier. Peng Yeyu walked for a while and didn't look back. He jumped down from the horse's back and waved his hand to hit the horse's head. The horse immediately fell down with a cry and stopped moving. Then he took out something from his chest and threw it on the horse. The horse immediately caught fire. Not long after, everything turned into nothingness. At this time, Peng Yeyu suddenly waved his left hand. With a strange movement, he disappeared in an instant. In the early morning of the next day, the sun had just risen. In the mountain range between the clouds and the water, in a cave, Zhang Xiaohua opened his eyes. Thinking about what he had done to Peng Yeyu last night, the corners of his mouth unconsciously curled into a smile. He released his divine sense and found that Dream had disappeared. Peng Yeyu had also disappeared. Everything would be impossible to investigate. However, the stone in Bai Yinqiu's bedroom palace, the jade slip underground, and the pill furnace that had turned into 6-8 trigrams purple gold furnace had to be explained. For this, Zhang Xiaohua had planned it out last night. He stood up, changed his clothes, and changed into Pan An's appearance. He made a gesture and went to the mountain range. At this time, between the clouds and the water was still shrouded in thick fog. But the mountain wind above the pool was gradually getting stronger. It had already blown away the fog at the outermost part of the island. It was no longer as thick as before. Zhang Xiaohua took out Chasing Dream, and it turned into 8 sword lights like swimming fish. They swam around his body. He used the flying technique to hide himself, and went to the pool. When he reached the side of the island, his divine sense had found that there was a layer of array around the island. He didn't go in but showed himself first and shouted, "Where is the girl from the Shendao sect?" He shouted 3 times in a row. These 3 sounds contained Zhang Xiaohua's genuine qi. The whole pool shook slightly. Between the clouds and the water, whether it was those who had not woken up yet or those who were on duty in the morning, were all alarmed. Everyone looked at the immortal flying in the sky in horror. "The girl from the Shendao sect. She's not here? Then that's easy. I came here to take away what belongs to I. You just have to tell her." Before his voice died away, Zhang Xiaohua flew out of the mountain. Not long after, he disappeared into the horizon. Standing on the giant island, the people who had been woken up from their sweet dreams finally woke up. It turned out that the other party had already infiltrated deep into the enemy's territory and taken away what belonged to them. What an immortal! There were so many of them, and they had such a tight defense, but they didn't even know when the other party left. Just when everyone was panicking, someone with sharp eyes saw the rising sun and shouted, "Look, look, the fog between the clouds and the water. Where did it go?" Of course, the thick fog yesterday had been blown away by the mountain wind. The true face of the giant island between the clouds and the water was revealed. Not good. Li Su, who was hiding among the people, changed his expression and shouted, "Don't panic. The immortal has already left. Besides, he didn't come to find trouble with you. What are you afraid of? You Quickly go and see if the array inside and outside the island is still there. A man with a pale gold face ran to the shore. Not long after, he came back happily and reported, "Li, the great formation on the island is still there. The formation in the pool outside the island is also unchanged." Good. Li Su breathed a sigh of relief. He nodded and said, "Brothers, take care of the house. The immortal must have something to discuss with our faction leader. Since our faction leader is not here, and he has no intention of staying, let's all go about our business." Everyone thought about it and agreed. Gradually, they regained their calmness. Although they were not used to the disappearance of the clouds, after a short while, they began to bask in the sun lazily and enjoyed it, causing them to forget about the unforeseen event. Of course, Li Su could not conceal the fact that such a great change had occurred on the water island. He immediately sent the disciples of the Huiming Hall to leave the island by boat and report to Bai Yanxiu at full speed. Zhang Xiaohua fooled the people from between the clouds and the water. She hid herself as she walked, making it seem like she had disappeared into the sky. In fact, she landed on the ground after walking for a short distance. With a sweep of her divine perception, she had already found the location of the odd beasts. She used the earth escape technique and secretly pulled Huan Huan out. Then, she jumped up and chased after Meng, who had been walking for a whole night. Chapter 1031. Chen Chen pursed his lips and said, I'll encounter it sooner or later. It's better to ask now. Alright, I'll let you know that the bottleneck of the immortal Tao is different for everyone. Even our sect's bottleneck has nothing in common with the elders. Perhaps my experience can be used as a reference for the elder, but for you, it's like playing the lute to a cow. So be it. If you want to tell me, I'll listen. If I can't comprehend it, I'll just treat it as a story. Chen Chen said with a smile. Alas, it's not that I don't want to tell you. Immortality is different from martial arts. If you don't reach the bottleneck, you won't understand it at all. Instead, it may lead you astray. Nun Jingyi shook her head and said, However, if you want to hear a story, I'll tell it to you. Hearing this, Chen Chen's eyes brightened and he almost clapped his hands in praise. He said, Then sect master, tell me quickly. Nun Jingyi did not know whether to laugh or cry. She said, Actually, it's not a story. It's just that a disciple of Ruijin Palace, Missouri Qingshan, picked a Chaohuandan for my sect, and this Chaohuandan was obtained by the current disciple of the guardian, Ren Xiaoyao. He returned the Chaohuandan to my sect according to Mo Qingshan's last wish. This Chaohuandan is an extremely rare immortal spiritual herb in the world. My sect refined this Chaohuandan into an elixir and took it. Naturally, I broke through the bottleneck in one fell swoop. This matter involved Nun Jingyi's love affair in her early years. Everyone in the hall knew about it. When they heard it at this time, they were all moved by Mo Qingshan's infatuation, and could not help sighing in their hearts. Chen Chen said enviously, This Ren Xiaoyao is really lucky. He went to Huanshu and got the Chaohuandan that no one had expected. This guy. Oh, Sir Hierarch, it seems that tomorrow is the martial arts circle assembly. I heard that Master Changsheng of the Dalan Temple has already passed Jinghai Lake, and is accompanied by the deputy master of the Greenwood Palace. As for Ren Xiaoyao and Zixia, why is there no news about them until now? Peacock frowned and looked at Nun Jingyi in confusion. She whispered, I went to the Tenryu sect and junior sister Yu Yan went to the Alliance of Righteous Sects. They both rushed back 10 days ago. Even though the Dalan Temple is far away, they should have returned by now. Nun Jingyi declined to comment. She looked at Nun Shuizhan and asked, Do you have any news about these two people? Reporting to sect leader, after the two of them appeared at Dragon Mountain and Poyang Town, they disappeared without a trace. No one knows where they went. Nun Shuizhan said, Besides, disciples of the Tenryu sect have appeared in Jianghu. I don't know if they have anything to do with Ren Xiaorao and Dream. Chen Chen asked curiously, What does the Tenryu sect have to do with Ren Xiaorao and Dream? Didn't senior sister Kong go to them? Alas, what should have happened has happened. Nun Jingyi sighed and said, However, they are still disciples of the fragrance cult. They told the disciples in Jianghu that if they found any trace of them, they should report it immediately. Nun Jingyi's words were strange. Everyone was surprised. Chen Chen also opened his mouth. Fortunately, he didn't ask anything in the end. Junior sister Shuizhen. How is the preparation for the reception in Huayu Peak? The preparations are almost complete. However, this martial arts assembly is a grand occasion that the fragrant religion has not seen for many years. There are a total of 230 sects that have received invitations. There are 512 sects that have not received invitations. According to Sir Hierarch, they are guests. The fragrance cult is also prepared to receive these sections. If you count them carefully, there are nearly 800 sections. Starting from Dianqi Lake, the outer disciples of the fragrance cult will accompany them. When they enter the mountain tomorrow and arrive at Huayu Peak, it will be the inner disciples of the fragrance cult who will receive them. Previously, we were only prepared to receive 500 sections. Now there are 300 more sections. We don't have enough people. What's there to report? Nun Jingyi smiled and said, I guess the disciples of Lingxiang Peak will want to participate in such a grand occasion. You should inform Distant Fire Temple, Greenwood Temple, Ruoshui Temple, and Thick Earth Temple to send some disciples over. I'm afraid those disciples can't wait to be happy. Sir Hierarch is wise. I'll go and inform them now. There's one more thing, Sir Hierarch. I heard from the disciples of Jinghai Lake that the Tenryu sect hasn't sent a heavenly king. Peacock said in a low voice. It's fine. Nun Jingyi waved her hand. The Tenryu sect is the most annoying. It's the inheritance of the demonic cult. There's a difference between life and death between us and the four immortal sects. Although the immortal sects and the demonic cult have been annihilated, and there have been fewer battles of life and death in the past few thousand years, they're still incompatible with us. It's normal that they don't come. But when I went, they didn't say that they wouldn't come. So they'll be the last. Maybe when all the sects come to Huayu Palace, their heavenly king will be the last to arrive. Sir Hierarch, this Sakura. Why is he so arrogant? Chen Chen asked. Sakura? Nun Jingyi smiled bitterly. The Tenryu sect's Sakura has never shown himself in public. He definitely won't participate in our fragrance cult's martial arts convention. Even if someone from the Tenryu sect comes, it'll only be a heavenly king. Oh, I see. Chen Chen was enlightened, but immediately asked, But, Sir Hierarch, you've broken through the bottleneck. Between the immortal sects and the Sakura, who's more powerful? Everyone's expression changed. Nun Jingfan and Peacock almost glared at Chen Chen. Nun Jingyi seemed to have been asked. She stared at the clear sky outside the window. After a while she said, The Sakura is the best in martial arts in the world. He's also the best in the immortal sects. Ever since the four immortal sects Fragrance Cult, Dalan Temple, Misty School, and Shendao sect were founded, he's been the best. Even now he's still the best. Silly girl. Do you think our sect can compare to the Sakura? What? Chen Chen was dumbfounded. How is that possible? Could it be that the Sakura of every generation is the best in martial arts? Sigh, we had our suspicions back then, but this is the truth, an indisputable truth. No one doubts this fact, and no one dares to refute this fact. But the immortal sects have been destroyed. The Shendao sect and Misty School have been destroyed. Why has the Tenryu sect always been so powerful? How did they pass down their knowledge? Chen Chen seemed to want to cram in his knowledge of the immortal sects. The diabolism is different from the immortal sects. The immortal sects use the vitality of heaven and earth as the foundation for cultivation. The diabolism is different. As for what kind of inheritance they use, we don't know. We only know that although the vitality of heaven and earth has been greatly reduced, although it has affected the Tenryu sect, it has affected us more deeply. So, although the cultivation of the Sakura of every generation has decreased, this has not affected them. They've always been the number one sect in the pugilistic world. The Sakura has always been the number one in the pugilistic world. Then Master Jingxian, Master Jinggang. Peacock asked in a low voice. This time should we ask about it? Nun Jingyi stopped and looked at Peacock thoughtfully. She nodded and said, Yes. They killed 2 of our elders. Even if the Sakura is the #1 person in the world, and the Tenryu sect is the #1 sect in the world, this matter must be explained clearly. Everyone praised him in their hearts and nodded. Lord Hierarch is right. But, Peacock, think about it again. Do you think it's possible to ask about this in front of all the heroes in the world? Master. Peacock's expression changed and she frowned. After a while she shook her head and said, Master is wise and farsighted. I'm still lacking in experience. This is not appropriate for me to ask. Chun was anxious and said, Senior sister, why are you talking in riddles with Master? Why don't you explain it clearly? Peacock looked at Nun Jingyi and turned to say, the death of the two masters is related to the Tenryu sect, but we don't have any evidence. If we ask them for no reason, they won't admit it. They might even ask us for evidence. Wouldn't it show that the Tenryu sect is incompetent? This matter can't be compared to the public vengeance in the martial arts world. We can't just ask for it openly. That's right. Chun also realized and said dejectedly, I thought I could find justice for the two masters. Justice is in the heart of the heavens. Justice is in the heart of the people. Nun Jingyi nodded and said, this is something that the Tenryu sect needs to investigate. We won't ask about it in front of others. Moreover, the Tenryu sect has killed so many of the Tenryu sect's spies. When will you hear them talk about it? Even if Chun says that a heavenly king of the Tenryu sect has been killed secretly, even if the Sakura is suspicious, he won't ask you in front of everyone. This is a slap to your own face. Nun Jingyi said, after all, tomorrow will be the most lively event that the Tenryu sect has ever seen in decades. Whether it's an enemy or a friend, everyone will be a guest tomorrow. Let's think about how to organize the Wulin convention tomorrow. Everyone's faces lit up with excitement. One after another, they offered suggestions. Chun glanced at Peacock and muttered to himself, this adulterous pair, I wonder where they've gone to hide and have fun. The next day it was a nice day. The Huayu Peak in the Tenryu sect was even more peaceful and calm. At the foot of the Huayu Peak, Nun Jingyi was dressed in a palace dress. Beside her, there were dozens of women dressed in palace dresses. However, everyone's head was covered with a veil, so it was hard to tell who was who. On the mountain path that was paved with yellow soil and sprinkled with clear water, there were already dozens of people in sight. Among the dozens of people, there were a few old men dressed in monk robes who did not ride horses. Behind the old monks, there were a few old men dressed in green who also did not ride horses. However, although these people did not ride horses and looked like they were just strolling, their figures were as smooth as moving clouds and flowing water. Their speed was extremely fast. Even the dozens of young disciples behind them who were dressed in various clothes and riding horses could barely keep up with them. Seeing the old monk, Nun Jingyi's face was full of smiles. Her feet paused slightly and her body floated forward like a willow catkin. She only walked for dozens of feet in the air before she stopped and said, Elder, Master Zhang-san, I haven't seen you for many years. How are you? Please cast a monthly vote, a recommendation vote, a collection, a tip. Chapter 1032. Hearing this, Elder Changsheng, who was dressed in monk robes, exerted some force on his feet, and also floated into the air. He was far ahead of the elders beside him and replied, Ba, I'm fine, but Abbess Jingyi. Congratulations, Abbess Jingyi. You've broken through the bottleneck, and your cultivation has increased by another level. Congratulations. Next to him, Alliance Master Zhang-san, who was almost shoulder to shoulder with Elder Changsheng, also took large strides. He was actually using a rare qinggong, shrinking earth into an inch. He wasn't much slower than Elder Changsheng. When Elder Changsheng finished speaking, he also cupped his hands and said, Zhang-san of the Righteous Alliance has come to pay a visit to Abbess Jingyi. Abbess Jingyi smiled and said, Fellow Taoists, for coming from afar, this old woman is endlessly grateful. Then she said to Zhang-san, Alliance Master Zhang, it's only been a few years since we last met, and you've actually mastered the qinggong shrinking earth into an inch. It's really commendable. Zhang-san modestly said, You're too kind. Compared to Abbess Jingyi's cultivation, my qinggong is insignificant. I wouldn't dare, I wouldn't dare. All the martial arts in the world returned to their origin, and in the end, they all reached the same height. As they spoke, the long distance was covered by the two of them. When they arrived in front of Abbess Jingyi, Zhang San said, I thought that entering Dianqi Lake meant entering the incense cult. Walking for a long time with it, this incense cult is indeed a paradise. Isn't that so? I didn't expect Abbess Jingyi to be so generous. She invited the entire Jianghu. Moreover, this Huayu Peak is actually so far from Jinghai Lake? Elder Changsheng, please don't blame me. I originally wanted to arrange for it to be at Jinghai Lake. After all, it's convenient for the heroes of Jianghu. However, that place doesn't have a ready-made palace, and it's also far from Lingxiang Peak. It took a lot of effort to arrange. After thinking for a long time, I decided to arrange for it to be at Huayu Peak. Huayu Palace is a palace left behind by the ancestors of the incense cult. It's the place where the ancestors of the Dalan Temple, the Misty School, the Shundao sect, and the Tenrya sect would drink and chat. Today's heroes of Jianghu are gathered here, showing that the incense cult is a place to treat guests. Ahaha. Alliance Master Zhang laughs. Our righteous Dao Alliance started after the immortal Dao Alliance. We have no chance to enter the Huayu Palace. Today we have obtained Nun Jingyi's approval. We must take a good look around. Alliance Master Zhang. Don't be ashamed of your inferiority. We are all inherited sects, while the righteous alliance started from scratch. You are indeed a hero, but you are also beyond our reach. In the future, when our sects provide guidance on Jianghu matters, won't the righteous alliance also be a frequent guest of Huayu Palace? Thank you for your praise, Abbess. Alliance Master Zhang said with a smile. Please go up the mountain. In the Huayu Palace, there is tea for the daughter of the Chuanxiang cult to taste. As they spoke, Nun Jingyi invited Elder Changchang and Alliance Master Zhang San. The three of them used their qinggong and headed towards Huayu Palace. Behind them, Great Master Changgung, Great Master Changxing, Vice Alliance Master Chai, Vice Alliance Master Mi, and the others were accompanied by Nun Jingfan and Nun Xuezhen. The other disciples were also accompanied by their corresponding disciples. After the two sects, it was the other Jianghu sect's turn. The masters and disciples of Ruijin Palace, Greenwood Palace, Lihua Palace, Ruoshui Palace, and Thick Earth Palace accompanied them up the mountain path. Other than the Dalan Temple and the Righteous Alliance, which did not have a limit on the number of people, the other sects had a quota of 4 people. As for those who came uninvited, they were informed that there would not be more than 4 people. Generally speaking, other than the sect master, there would be a vice sect master or an elder, and then there would be the 2 most outstanding disciples of the younger generation. Therefore, there were more than 3,000 people from the 800 sects. Including the elders and disciples of the Chuanxiang cult, there would be more than 5,000 people. This was also the immortal path inheritance of the Chuanxiang cult. The Huayu Peak was incomparably tall, and the Huayu Palace on top of it was also built with immortal path techniques. It was not inferior to the Mo Xian Palace on the Lingxiang Peak. But even so, other than the 230 sects invited by the Chuanxiang cult, more than 1,000 people from the other 512 sects, nearly 2,000 people, could only sit in the square outside the Huayu Palace. How big was the square of the Huayu Peak? Even with Zhang Xiaohua's vision, it was amazing. Therefore, more than 2,000 people were more than enough. In addition, the Chuanxiang cult was very well prepared. Every sect had a set of tables and chairs. When they sat down, there was an order and there was no sense of uneasiness. Jingyi Shirtai invited the elder and alliance master Zhang San into the Huayu Palace and sat down. The elder looked around and sighed. I've only heard of the Huayu Palace before. Now that I've come here, it really lives up to its name. Before Alliance Master Zhang San could speak, Great Master Changgung smiled and said, The abbot is right. The Chuanxiang cult's immortal atmosphere is not something our sects can compare to. You flatter me, you flatter me. Jingyi Shirtai had a smile on her face, but she was still modest. Your sect is a pure land, blessed by the Buddha and protected by the Dharma protectors. My Chuanxiang cult really doesn't dare to have the heart to compare. Hearing Jingyi Shirtai mention the Dharma protectors, Great Master Changgung was a little displeased. He looked around and said with a smile, "What Dharma protectors? They're only there to intimidate demons and small Taoists. When they meet a real master, they can only protect themselves. The Dharma protectors that Jingyi Shirtai sent to my sect are the real Dharma protectors that can shake the Jianghu." Jingyi Shirtai raised her eyebrows and asked curiously, "Great Master Changgung, what do you mean?" Elder Changxing said, "The Dharma protectors of your Chuanxiang cult naturally know the whole story. Shirtai, why do you have to ask us on the spot?" His tone was a little unfriendly. That was because Zhang Xiaohua broke through the 3 tests of the Dalan Temple and damaged the Dalan Temple's reputation. How could the Dalan Temple tell outsiders about this? Even if the Chuanxiang cult had spies in the Dalan Temple, they wouldn't know about this matter. Although Jingyi Shirtai sent Zhang Xiaohua to the Dalan Temple for her own reasons, she didn't receive any reports from the spies. She also didn't see Zhang Xiaohua and Dream come back. Of course, she didn't know the reason. But looking at Master Changxing's expression, Jingyi Shirtai's heart was already blooming with joy. She definitely wouldn't mention this matter in front of the Righteous Alliance or other sect leaders. She only smiled and said, "Ren Xiaoyao is the only Dharma protector of my Chuanxiang cult. He's still young. If he has offended you in any way, this old woman will apologize." Haha, the Chuanxiang cult has such a good disciple, and our Jianghu has such a handsome youth. This old monk and the others are all happy. There's no need to apologize. The elder laughed. Seeing that there was some misunderstanding between the 2 sects, Jingyi Shirtai could only say, "3 great masters, please don't blame me. This old woman really didn't mean anything else. It's because Ren Xiaorao and Zixia still haven't returned to Lingering Fragrance Peak." The elder was stunned. He turned to look at Great Master Changgung and Master Changxing. He exchanged a look and said to Jingyi Shirtai, "Shirtai, you sent Miss Zixia to Jianghu as a diplomatic envoy. Presumably, you have other plans. Something has happened. Perhaps 3 great masters can also tell?" Jingyi Shirtai didn't wait for Master Changxing to finish speaking. Master Changxing didn't say anything else. He just nodded and said, "Since Shirtai Jingyi can tell, why can't this old monk and the others?" Alliance Master Zhang San, who was sitting on the other side, was somewhat embarrassed and angry. He cursed inwardly. "You 2 great sects with immortal legacies. If you have something to say, just say it. Don't beat around the bush." However, he still couldn't say it. Otherwise, it would show how ignorant and inexperienced he was. Therefore, he also pretended to nod, as if he had a card up his sleeve. "Since that's the case, I don't think anyone from the Tenryu sect will come today," Jingyi Shirtai said with a smile. "That should be the case." The elder nodded. Alliance Master Zhang San also smiled, but he was already cursing in his heart. What did this have to do with the Tenryu sect not coming? "All right, let's begin the martial arts circle convention." As she spoke, Jingyi Shirtai stood up and walked to the side of the chair. She moved her hands slightly in her sleeves and said softly, "Everyone, welcome to my fragrant religion." Jingyi Shirtai's voice was very soft, but in the ears of the people in Huayu Palace, it was as if she was speaking right next to them. When they focused on their ears, they found that the voice didn't come from Jingyi, who was standing in front of them. Instead, it came from all directions in Huayu Palace. It wasn't just the people in Huayu Palace. In the square outside Huayu Palace, more than 2,000 people were noisy at first. When they heard Jingyi Shirtai's voice, it was as if there were 2,000 Jingyi Shirtai sitting in front of them. The voice also came from the square beside them. Everyone was very curious. Their eyes were full of admiration. What was the demeanor of a great sect with immortal legacies? This was it. Apart from the Dalan Temple, Fragrant Religion and Huayu Palace, which other sect could be so generous? Other things aside, just the fact that one person's voice could reach more than 3,000 people's ears so clearly was something that even a super sect like the Righteous Alliance couldn't do. "Everyone, welcome to my Fragrant Religion's Huayu Peak. Please participate in the martial arts assembly for my Fragrant Religion's re-entry into the pugilistic world." Standing in front of thousands of people, Jingyi Shirtai spoke with assurance as if there was no one around. As everyone knows, My fragrant religion has been blessed by my immortal seniors for thousands of years. Under the protection of the sect-protecting formation, we rarely participate in pugilistic world affairs. Although this has preserved the legacy of my fragrant religion, on the other hand, it has also erased the edges of my fragrant religion. We lack the guts of a great sect like the Righteous Alliance. Today, due to various reasons, the sect-protecting array of the fragrant religion has collapsed. From today onwards, the sect-protecting array of the fragrant religion will no longer be the sect-protecting array of the fragrant religion. In the future, we will integrate into the Jianghu, into everyone. I hope that in the future, all the Jianghu sects will work together with the sect-protecting array of the fragrant religion and push the development of martial arts to the peak. Today is a milestone for my fragrant religion. It is also a milestone in the history of the pugilistic world. Today is a small step for my fragrant religion. It is also a big step for the pugilistic world. Today, the pugilistic world has given my fragrant religion a chance. In the future, my fragrant religion will give the entire pugilistic world a surprise. Although my fragrant religion is a great sect in the pugilistic world, my fragrant religion has always adhered to the principle of not forming alliances and not seeking hegemony. I believe that due to my fragrant religion's re-entry into the pugilistic world, it will definitely bring peace to the pugilistic world. Please cast a monthly vote, a recommendation vote, a collection, a tip. Chapter 1033. Abbess Jingyi spoke for a long time before finally smiling. After speaking for so long, I just want to tell the disciples of incense cult that we're back. Jianghu, we're back. Instantly, all of the incense cult disciples roared. Thousands of disciples shouted in unison. It was a shocking sight. Not only were the sects outside Huayu Palace shocked, but even the sects inside Huayu Palace, the Dalan Temple, and the Alliance of Righteous Tao were shocked. Alright, this old woman has finished speaking. In the future, when the disciples of my humble sect roam the Jianghu, I would like to thank everyone for taking care of me. Nun Jingyi cupped her hands and said. No one dared to be rude. They all stood up and returned the gesture. Master Longevity stood up and walked over. Abbess Jingyi knew this and moved away from where she had been standing. Master Longevity put his palms together and said, Everyone, incense cult is a branch of Jianghu. Thousands of years ago, although there was a protective formation, the disciples of incense cult could still be found all over Jianghu. Now that the heavens have changed, the disciples of incense cult can once again appear in Jianghu. This is incense cult's fortune and Jianghu's fortune. This old monk won't say much, but I'll represent all of Jianghu in welcoming the disciples of incense cult back into Jianghu. After hearing Master Longevity's words, the crowd applauded. Who wouldn't give face to a Dalan Temple elder? After Master Longevity left, Alliance leader Zhang San coughed lightly and was about to go on stage when a voice came from outside the palace. Incense cult has such a grand event. How can I be absent? Abbess Jingyi wasn't surprised. She used her divine sense to scan the outside and was surprised. She raised her voice and said, Which sect are you from? Of all the famous sects in Jianghu, my school of fragrance sends out disciples to invite you. As for the other famous sects, my school of fragrance has a limited number of disciples, so I can't invite them one by one. Since you're here, then you're a guest. My school of fragrance will naturally welcome you with courtesy. Haha, if the Alliance of Righteous Tao can participate in incense cult's martial assembly, why can't we? Since the incense cult could re-enter Jianghu after thousands of years, why can't we do the same? I'll let Abbess Jingyi know that we came here because we wanted to use incense cult's martial arts tournament as an opportunity to tell the heroes of the world that Between the Clouds and the Water has returned to the world of martial arts. Between the Clouds and the Water? Nun Jingyi and Grandmaster Longevity looked at each other, then at Zhang San. Zhang San also shook his head slightly. Re-enter Jianghu? Nun Jingyi raised her eyes and said, I wonder what this re-entering between the clouds and the water means. Hee. That voice suddenly became sharp and piercing to the ears. Then I'll let you take a look, lest you forget. Nun Jingyi seemed to have seen something strange. The elders were also surprised. A fiery red light shot in from outside the palace like a flaming arrow. It hit the curtains of Huayu Palace. The curtains were originally restricted by the immortal Tao. A faint light flashed and the curtains shattered with a crack. Then, a similar light streaked through the air like a meteor and shot towards Nanjing. Whoosh! Everyone in the Huayu Palace stood up. Hidden weapons or arrows in the martial arts world might have a sound, but they definitely wouldn't have such a brilliance. Which sect in the Huayu Palace didn't have a little bit of background? Who didn't know about the immortal Tao? Huayu Palace wasn't the only place. Above the square of Huayu Palace, the fiery red light flew in from outside and streaked across the sky. They had long since noticed it. Perhaps these sects knew little about the immortal Tao, but the appearance of an immortal Tao senior in Rejuvenation Valley was now a hot topic in the entire Jianghu. Didn't they come here to inquire about the incense cult? As expected, the immortal Tao didn't disappoint. It revealed its ferocity. Skyshaker Bao? Nanjing frowned and blurted out. Seeing that the arrow-like light was about to reach her, she wasn't in a hurry. Instead, she took out a jade talisman and flicked it forward. Pop! Another crack sounded. A splash of water appeared in the air, blocking the light. Sizzle! When the light touched the water, it drilled forward and slowly faded away. After a few moments, the result was clear. Puff! The light penetrated the water and continued to shoot towards Nanjing. Nanjing sneered. You only have the Shindao sect's protection. Even if you have the Shindao sect's Skyshaker Bao, your cultivation is insufficient. What can you do to our sect? As she spoke, she waved her hand and took out a dark green net from somewhere. With a shake of her hand, she wrapped it around the light. Although there were many transparent holes in the net, there was a pearl smaller than a mung bean at the intersection of two threads. When the light was trapped by the net, it stopped in midair. Although it seemed to have a mind of its own, it was still trapped by the net. Nanjing snorted. Her finger moved slightly and pointed at the net. The net shrunk into a ball, and the fiery red light dimmed a few times before being extinguished. How is it? Can you still shoot another arrow? Nanjing sneered. Haha. The voice outside laughed. Nanjing, could it be that you want to test my cultivation? Before he finished speaking, a suffocating aura came from outside Huayu Palace. Although there were many people in the palace who weren't cultivators of the Tao of Immortality, their hearts throbbed. They couldn't help but look at the sky outside the palace. Sure enough, a round and flat object flew in from outside the palace. It was the size of a palm at first, but it kept growing bigger. When it was about to reach Huayu Palace, it became the size of a dustpan. The demon refining gourd? Two astonished voices sounded at the same time. Immediately, a green ribbon flew out of Huayu Palace's window like a python. It wanted to entangle the dustpan. Who would have thought that the dustpan would spin around without any effort? The green ribbon couldn't do anything to it. Then, a figure suddenly flew out of the window and floated there. It was Nanjing. Nanjing floated above the square. She pointed her finger, and the green ribbon changed again. With a whoosh, it spread open and wrapped around the dustpan. Then it pulled the dustpan into Nanjing's hand. However, just as the dustpan was pulled down a little, a rumbling sound came from the dustpan. A pale white brilliance appeared, and the dustpan spun even more violently. In an instant, the green ribbon was torn apart. When Nanjing saw this, her expression changed slightly. She made a hand seal and hit the green ribbon. The green ribbon flashed with the same brilliance and pounced on the dustpan. At this time, a powerful suction force came from outside Huayu Palace. It brought a gentle breeze. The green ribbon flickered in the air a few times before it was sucked over. Oh no! Nanjing cried out. This really is the devil refining gourd, and the technique it uses is also from the Shindao sect. Could it be a disciple of the Shindao sect? Thinking quickly, Nanjing waved her hand, and a triangle appeared in her hand. This triangle was dotted with green spots and looked quite simple. Just as the Shirtai was about to activate it, a Buddhist chant was heard from inside Huayu Palace. Ba. Then a pale yellow figure flew out of the window. It was the Dalan Temple's Elder Changsheng. Before Elder Changsheng landed on the ground, He flicked his wrist and the string of Buddhist prayer beads flew up. When they reached the side of the green scarf, the prayer beads had already become the size of a wicker basket. The prayer beads emitted a very comfortable Buddhist light that resisted the suction force. Only then did the green scarf stop moving. It flipped over and covered the wicker basket that was emitting a rumbling sound. Humph, the Dalan Temple and the incense sect only know how to cooperate with each other. It's been thousands of years, haven't they changed? Ga. Another unusually clear voice came from afar. The incense sect hasn't been so lively in a long time. Why is it so coincidental today? It's a good thing that this heavenly king came early. I can actually see the long-awaited battle of immortals. Before the voice died away, a green thing that looked like a beehive flew over from afar with a sharp sound. When it came close, everyone could clearly see several wisps of faint black smoke floating out of the beehive. Like tentacles, they clawed at the Dharma artifacts in the air. Black smoke nest. Garuda? The voice from before cried out in surprise. Then the dustpan-like thing suddenly rose up. After a few turns, it was about to fly out of Huayu Palace. At this moment, the clear voice asked curiously, "Little girl, who are you from the Shundao sect? You actually have the devil refining gourd and can recognize this heavenly king?" As the voice spoke, the wisps of black smoke from the beehive suddenly stretched out, wanting to hit the dustpan-like. However, the suction force that had been blocked by the Buddhist beads suddenly changed direction, and the dustpan-like sped up. Even the black smoke was pulled extremely long. Heavenly King Garuda, is this the way of a guest? Nanjing-yi said expressionlessly. What guest? This heavenly king is happy to see you fight. My hands are itching. Let's all have some fun together. As the voice spoke, the black smoke from the black smoke nest became thicker, and the tentacles gradually formed. Nanjing-yi looked at Elder Changsheng and pointed with her right hand. The green ribbon circled a few times and shrunk to an extremely small size. It moved strangely in the air, dodging the attacks of the black smoke, and fell into Nanjing-yi's hands. Elder Changsheng's Buddhist beads were even more powerful. They flew straight at the black smoke nest. Wherever the milky white Buddhist light went, the black smoke became thinner and disappeared. The Buddhist light had a natural restraining effect on the black smoke. With just a touch, it was already so powerful. Chapter 1034. Changsheng, you old monk. Garuda's heart ached when he saw the black smoke diminish. Before he could curse, the prayer beads circled around the black smoke nest and slowly fell into the elder's hands. Sigh, how did it end so quickly? Garuda's clear voice was filled with regret. The black smoke nest quickly flew out of Huayu Palace. Disciples of the Shundao sect, please come to Huayu Palace for a chat. Nanjing-yi raised her voice. Yes, Nanjing-yi, please. As soon as he finished speaking, a beautiful middle-aged woman with a beautiful figure flew in from the sky. She was also using the levitation technique. Then, like a gust of black wind, a thin and small man dressed in strange clothes descended from the sky and floated in the air. This man was the Tenryu sect's Garuda Heavenly King. Garuda Heavenly King had a pointy mouth and monkey cheeks. His long eyebrows were slanted into his sideburns. He landed on the square and turned to ask the middle-aged woman, "Who are you? Since when did the Shundao sect have its own inheritance?" The middle-aged woman cupped her hands and bowed. "Let me tell you, Garuda Heavenly King. I am a descendant of the Shundao sect. My name is Bai Yanqiu, but the Shundao sect was removed from the Jianghu thousands of years ago. I have no intention of calling myself the Shundao sect anymore. Now my sect is called Between the Clouds and the Water, which means that I follow the clouds above the water." Between the clouds and the water? Garuda's small eyes turned. Why is it so troublesome? Shundao sect sounds better. Bai Yanqiu smiled. I am now the sect leader of Between the Clouds and the Water. I came here to meet my brothers in the Jianghu and inform them that Between the Clouds and the Water will be famous in the Jianghu from now on. Nanjing-yi sneered. If the Shundao sect is related to the incense cult, then I am naturally willing to support them. But what is the origin of Between the Clouds and the Water? How can you take advantage of my sect's return to the Jianghu? Nanjing-yi, do you think I am willing to do that? My sect has already made preparations to hold the martial arts assembly today and announce our return to the Jianghu to the world. Who would have thought that the incense cult would also announce our return to the Jianghu to the world? Since the incense cult is holding the assembly, there is naturally no need for us to hold the assembly of between the clouds and the water. Let's not talk about the fact that the heroes of the Jianghu have just finished participating in the assembly of heroes, so there are no more heroes who would care about the assembly of heroes between the clouds and the water. In terms of reputation, between the clouds and the water can't compare to the incense cult. Why don't we use the incense cult's glory and enter the Jianghu hand in hand with the incense cult? When she heard Bai Yanqiu lowering his status, Nun Jingyi looked at Garuda, who was standing next to her, and then at the elder. She could not help but ponder. At this time, many people had also rushed out of Huayu Palace. The current leader of the Righteous Dao Alliance, Zhang San, was watching this unbelievable battle from afar. His face was as dark as water. It was unknown whether he was jealous or had other plans. All right, Bai Zhangmen is right. Since it is a martial arts assembly, then it is naturally a martial arts assembly for the entire Jianghu. Not only can the incense cult announce this to the entire Jianghu, even if the Shundao sect reappears, we should also be able to. Nun Jingyi, there is a difference in your words. It is between the clouds and the water, not the Shundao sect. Bai Yanqiu said with a smile. He, Nun Jingyi laughed and said, whether it is the Shundao sect or between the clouds and the water, they are both sects that have inherited the way of the immortals. How can the incense cult not lend a hand? In that case, thank you, Nun Jingyi. Bai Yanqiu smiled and bowed. If that is the case, Bai Zhangmen, why don't you call your disciples out? Please excuse me, Nun Jingyi. Bai Yanqiu did not mind. He waved his hand and made a strange gesture. Immediately, dozens of disciples of Between the Clouds and the Water wielding long sabers appeared around Huayu Palace. They quickly used their qinggong to arrive beside Bai Yanqiu. The expressions of the people in Huayu Palace changed. Their eyes were filled with anger. The disciples of the incense cult were especially angry. Nun Jingyi, I did not mean to do this. It was just a way to protect myself. It is fine, it is fine. This method is very normal. Nun Jingyi said nonchalantly. Even if it is the incense cult, we still have a backup plan. As she spoke, she reached into her bosom and took out an apricot yellow flag. She poured her true qi into it and waved it slightly. A few faint clouds floated out of the flag and quickly flew out of Huayu Palace. As they flew, the edges of the clouds became thinner and thinner. By the time they were out of Huayu Palace, they had almost disappeared. Abbess Jingyi waved the small flag again. Boom! Outside the Huayu Palace, a 30 feet tall wall of fire immediately rose. The flame was more than a foot long and emitted a greenish-yellow color. This Bai Yanqiu was dumbfounded. Garuda looked at the wall of fire with a dignified expression. All right, this is just a precaution from the incense cult. It seems that it will not be necessary. Nun Jingyi smiled and waved the flag again. The wall of fire immediately disappeared. Inside the Huayu Palace, everyone's reactions were different. The heads of the famous sects all looked pensive, as if they were considering something. The other sects all looked enlightened, and then their faces were full of excitement. They were even more excited than when they watched the fight of the immortal Dao. Many people had already begun to secretly look at their feet, or use their hands to touch the small tables and stools, trying to find traces of the immortal Dao magic arts. Of course, there were also many people who looked frightened. They were sects that were not very close to the incense cult. They wanted to use this martial arts circle convention to find out what was going on. But looking at the incense cult, if they wanted to, all they had to do was wave their flag, and everyone in Huayu Palace would be buried. Their original plan of using their qinggong to escape as soon as they realized that something was wrong was completely useless. Therefore, everyone understood why the incense cult had held the martial arts circle convention on Huayu Peak. Bai Yanqiu had been operating on the water island of the Water Cloud sect for decades. She had confidence in her Dharma power and magic, and was confident that she had the capital to confront the Fragrant Cult. That was why she had mobilized so many people to show off at the Fragrant Cult's Martial Arts Society Assembly. Who would have thought that, not to mention magic, She had only dabbled in it. And it was not the time to shed all pretense of cordiality. She had brought a group of disciples to the Huayu Peak secretly to show off. Who would have thought that? She had still fallen into Nun Jingyi's trap. A big sect with an immortal Tao legacy. It was not a joke. Bai Yanqiu's expression changed slightly as thousands of thoughts swirled in her mind. After a moment, she came up with a plan. She bowed and said, as expected of the illustrious fragrant religion, this concubine was truly lacking in manners, and was like a frog at the bottom of a well. I apologize now. Please forgive me, Abbess Jingyi. Nun Jingyi waved her hand and smiled. After the immortal Tao legacy, your Shendao sect, haha, Nun Jingyi, the Shendao sect is history. Our sect is now between the clouds and the water. Oh, I am confused. I am used to calling you that. Bai Zhangmen, please forgive me. Your sect, between the clouds and the water, has been reborn and has entered the Jianghu. You and the incense cult announced at the same time. This is a grand event in the Jianghu. It is the best of both worlds. How can I not applaud and welcome you? Come, come, come. Garuda King Bai Zhangmen, please take a seat in Huayu Palace. Haha, I was just about to nag you. Garuda laughed and flew into Huayu Palace like a wisp of smoke. Please. Bai Yanqiu was polite and followed the elder into Huayu Palace. However, in the previous Huayu Palace, there was an oval platform at the head of the table. There was a chair on the platform, which was where Nun Jingyi sat. Elder Changsheng and Alliance leader Zhang San sat in the VIP seats below the platform. Garuda entered the Huayu Palace. Without even looking, he flew straight to the platform and sat down. Nun Jingyi's expression changed slightly. Just as she was about to speak, Garuda laughed and said, Jingyi, the seats in Huayu Palace don't seem to be like this. Nun Jingyi's eyes narrowed. She said coldly, I thought the Tenryas sect might look down on the incense cult and wouldn't send people here. The Shendao sect and Misty School have been removed from the Jianghu. Wouldn't the 5 seats on this platform be a waste? If I invited the elder and Alliance Master Zhang San, who else would come? I might as well hide these 4 seats. Ha ha ha, Garuda said again. Now that the Tenryas sect is here, this, between the clouds and the water is here too, Jingyi, you don't have to hide anymore. You won't have the chance to sit on the platform alone. After a moment of silence, Jingyi looked at the confused Zhang San and Bai Yanqiu and said with a smile, Heavenly King Garuda is right. Please wait a moment. As she spoke, she made a hand sign and hit the platform. A faint yellow light flashed. On the spacious platform, 4 more chairs appeared in picturesque disorder beside Garuda's chair. Even Garuda's chair revealed the essence of white jade. In Huayu Palace, everyone was stunned. Nun Jingyi sneered and said, Heavenly King Garuda, the chairs are here. Please sit on the Tenryu sect's chair. Aha, I know. Garuda's figure floated up as if he was being carried by an invisible hand. He flew to a jade chair that was slightly blackened and said, My heavenly dragon divine religion hates doing things that steal the limelight. However, we also hate those who don't care about the dragon god sect. Nun Jingyi didn't reply. She bowed to the elder and said, Great master, please take a seat. Many thanks to you. Hee, guests should follow the host's wishes. This old monk doesn't mind. As he spoke, the elder stepped onto the platform and walked to the rightmost side, right next to Garuda's chair. Nun Jingyi glanced at Bai Yanqiu and Zhang San and said with a smile, According to the rules, my left hand should be the seat of the Shendao sect's sect master. Although Bai Zhangmen isn't the Shendao sect's sect master, he still inherited the Shendao sect's legacy. The sect master between the clouds and the water can sit on my right hand. Bai Yanqiu was overjoyed. He cupped his hands and said, Thank you, Nun Jingyi. With that, he went onto the platform and sat on the second last jade chair on the left. Looking at the last chair on the left, Nun Jingyi smiled and said, Alliance Master Zhang San, this chair belongs to the Misty School's sect master. Now that Misty Peak is in the hands of the Righteous Alliance, this chair naturally belongs to Alliance Master Zhang. Ha. Zhang San's gloomy mood finally relaxed. He cupped his hands and said, Thank you. He stepped forward and sat on it. Chapter 1035. The great sects of the immortal Tao were the originators of martial arts in the world. The 5 sects had been arranged 10,000 years ago, but the vicissitudes of the world had changed. The branches of the other 5 sects had their own lives and deaths, so they were no longer close to the 5 sections. The 5 sects had changed a lot. The incense cult had not entered the Jianghu for a long time. The Shindao sect had been destroyed long ago, and was replaced by the sect between the clouds and the water. The Misty School had been destroyed and was replaced by the Righteous Alliance. Now that the 5 sects had taken their seats in Huayu Palace, there was a new order in the Jianghu. Nanjing Yi was the last to ascend the high platform. She walked to the jade seat in the center and sat down. Just as she sat down, there was a flash of multicolored light on the high platform, and the faint sound of bamboo instruments. Although it was faint, it had already spread throughout the Huayu Palace. In the Huayu Palace, there were more than 200 sects and thousands of people. Envy flashed in their eyes as they wondered when their own sects would be able to ascend the high platform of the immortal Tao. Alright everyone, please have some tea and rest for a moment. The Wulin convention will continue with its brilliance. Nanjing Yi cupped her hands slightly, her voice spreading throughout the Huayu Palace. Immediately, the inner sect disciples of Lingering Fragrance Peak held trays in their hands. On the trays were tea and fruits made by Lingering Fragrance Cult. They were delivered to the tables of the various sections. Everyone in the Jianghu had an unruly side. When they saw beautiful women, even the inner sect disciples of the incense cult couldn't help but look lustful. However, when they saw the women's martial arts cultivation, they couldn't help but be flabbergasted. Perhaps on the surface, one couldn't see a person's true martial arts with the naked eye, but which of these sect leaders and elders hadn't been immersed in martial arts for decades? How could they not be able to see the characteristics of powerful martial arts from a few details? How could they still look at these young women with martial arts that weren't inferior to their own? Well, maybe they had some special hobbies, but let's not talk about them. Thus, almost all of the elders couldn't help but look like profound elders because of their status. The young disciples were different. When they saw such beautiful women, how could they maintain their composure? They all had smiles plastered on their faces as they stood up one by one and greeted them politely. Their teachers wanted to stop them, but they changed their minds and didn't say anything. These young disciples of the various sects were all young talents that had been selected by their respective sections. They had come here not only to broaden their horizons, but also to show off their skills in front of the heroes of the world. Their mission was to gain face for their respective sections. When the masters of the various sects saw that the inner disciples of the School of Incense were so outstanding, they must have made some calculations in their hearts. If their disciples were to gain the favor of a female disciple and establish a relationship with the School of Incense, then, not to mention the status of their sects in Jianghu, perhaps they would even have the opportunity to sit on those jade chairs on the high platform. In the end, even some of the bashful young disciples were secretly kicked by their own teachers under the table, causing their faces to turn red. But this was just wishful thinking. The female disciples of the incense cult might not be as outstanding as the disciples of Mo Ninggong, but they could not possibly set their sights on the martial world. Cough cough, of course, unless they were like Zhang Xiaohua, who was so infatuated that she could fight her way up to Lingering Fragrance Peak. Only then would they consider it. The inside and outside of Huayu Palace was a lively scene, and the high platform was another scene. Abbess Jingyi waved her hand and cast a spell. Immediately, a layer of milky white restrictive spells appeared around the platform, surrounding it tightly. Bai Yanqiu and Zhang San's expressions changed slightly. They didn't understand what was going on. But when they saw that the Grand Elder and Garuda didn't say anything, they looked at each other and didn't say anything. Alright, it's rare for the School of Incense to entertain guests. I hope that everyone will not mind. As she spoke, a few female disciples passed through the milky white restriction. Each of them held a tray in their hands. The one in front had 5 small wine cups on it. Nanjing Yi smiled and said, "This is the chilled ice wine brewed from the chilled ice grass of the School of Incense. We used the recipe of the School of Immortals, and it has great benefits for refining one's vital energy. Please enjoy." As she spoke, Nanjing Yi downed the wine cup in her hand. Then she closed her eyes and adjusted her breathing. as if she was refining the vital energy in the wine. Haha, Garuda saw this and laughed. I didn't expect the school of incense to be so generous. You even took out such a precious item to entertain your guests. If I didn't come today, I would have suffered a great loss. As she spoke, she tilted her head back and down the wine. Ba, the elder chanted. Wine is not wine, meat is not meat. Wine and meat pass through the intestines, but Buddha remains in the heart. She also downed the wine in one gulp. Bai Yanqiu looked at the dark green wine in the small wine cup in his hand, and couldn't help but hesitate. The wine cup was carved from white jade and should have been warm, but when he held it in his hand, it felt a little cold. However, this coldness was different from usual. It was mixed with the warmth, and there were traces of icy ripples. As he raised the wine cup, a faint fragrance drifted into his nose. The wine swirled left and right with the movement of his hand. Every time it swirled, a faint fragrance would spread out. Bai Yanqiu released his divine sense, and his expression changed slightly. He saw that the small wine cup was overflowing with vital energy. It was many times more vital energy than the immortal tea between the clouds and the water. And this vital energy was faintly dispersed along with the fragrance. Bai Yanqiu didn't dare to be negligent. He tilted his head back and poured the wine into his mouth. Immediately, a refreshing feeling spread out from his mouth, and then a small stream rose from his stomach. This was the essence of the vital energy of heaven and earth. Bai Yanqiu's face turned slightly red, and he immediately used the Shundao Sex heart technique to refine this vital energy of heaven and earth into his meridians. At this time, Zhang San was different. He saw that the other 4 people treasured this strange-looking wine, and also closed their eyes to adjust their breathing. How could he not know that this was an item of the immortal path? However, when he smelled the wine cup in his hand, it didn't have the smell of ordinary wine at all. There was only a refreshing fragrance that made him feel refreshed, and it had nothing to do with the wine. He hesitated for a moment, but just as he was about to use it, Nun Jingyi opened her eyes and said with a smile, Alliance Head Zhang, this wine was brewed using the Immortal Path's method. If you don't know the Immortal Path's heart technique, you won't be able to refine the essence of the wine. This wine is just an ordinary drink. It won't increase one's inner strength by much, and can be said to be a waste. I think if there are people in the Righteous Alliance who know the Immortal Path's cultivation method, why don't Alliance Head Zhang bring it back? Zhang San's eyes narrowed, and his face turned slightly green. However, he quickly recovered and nodded. Nun Jingyi is right. Good, bring me a jade bottle. Yes, a voice answered from outside the restriction. A female disciple dressed in light red clothes came in from outside, holding a small jade bottle in her hand. Eh? The female disciple had just entered when she saw Garuda, who was sitting on the jade chair, and had just opened his eyes. She couldn't help but cry out in surprise. The female disciple was also stunned. She looked at Garuda in confusion. With a whoosh, Garuda suddenly jumped up from the jade chair. He seemed to have forgotten to use his qinggong. He walked in a few steps to the female disciple and grabbed her wrist. Ah! The female disciple was stunned. She tried to use her qinggong to dodge, but how could she be a match for Garuda? Before she could move, she was caught. With a cry of surprise, the jade bottle fell to the ground. Nun Jingyi was stunned. With a wave of her hand, the jade bottle flew into her hand. She said unhappily, Garuda, what is the meaning of this? However, Garuda completely ignored her. He held the female disciple's wrist with one hand and pressed her acupoints with the other. He began to open his eyes wide and carefully examine her from head to toe. Nun Jingyi coldly snorted and handed the jade bottle to Zhang San, saying, Alliance leader Zhang, put this icy soul wine into the jade bottle. If it is left in the wine cup for too long, the essence inside will disappear. Zhang San took the wine cup and poured it into the jade bottle as instructed. He put it away and said no more. He coldly looked at Garuda, who was not far away. Garuda seemed to have obtained some kind of treasure. He looked at the female disciple from head to toe. He was just short of taking off her clothes to examine her. The female disciple's face was red with embarrassment, but her eyes were filled with fear. Her body trembled uncontrollably. Although she couldn't move, she still looked at Nun Jingyi for help. Enough, Garuda. Let go of your hand. Nun Jingyi said angrily. Nun Jingyi, wait a moment. As he spoke, Garuda stretched out his right hand and pointed between the female disciple's eyebrows. Humph. Nun Jingyi coldly snorted. Her hand moved slightly, and a gust of wind from her finger attacked Garuda's main acupoint on his back. Garuda chuckled and dodged the attack. Sigh. Nun Jingyi rose into the air like a wisp of smoke. She stretched out her hand and grabbed the back of Garuda's neck. Garuda didn't turn around. His body flashed, and an afterimage flashed. In the blink of an eye, he floated to another part of the platform, still holding the female disciple in his hand. When Nun Jingyi's figure turned in the air and wanted to continue the chase, Garuda's finger had already landed between the female disciple's eyebrows. Ha ha! Garuda let out a surprised laugh. He landed on the ground, let go of the female disciple's hand, and jumped onto the jade chair. However, the female disciple's acupoint hadn't been unsealed. She could only stand there in a daze. Garuda, what is the meaning of this? Nun Jingyi walked to the female disciple's side and looked her up and down. She also used her divine sense to check her. She didn't find anything unusual. Nothing. Nun Jingyi, please don't blame me. Garuda seemed to be in an extremely good mood. His lean face was filled with a smile as he said, This one has a presumptuous request. I need Nun Jingyi's approval. Nun Jingyi looked at the frightened female disciple and shook her head. If you don't explain the matter clearly, this sect won't agree to anything. It's actually nothing much. Garuda looked at the female disciple behind Nun Jingyi and smiled. This girl has a body of true fire. Her meridians contain fire-type true essence. This heavenly king urgently needs to break through a bottleneck. This one has no choice but to be thick-skinned and ask for this girl from Nun Jingyi to be a cauldron for dual cultivation. Chapter 1036. Cauldron. Zhang Sen wasn't the only one surprised. Jingyi and the other immortal cultivators were also surprised. Jingyi looked at the female disciple beside her, her eyes full of curiosity. She turned around and said, Garuda, the cauldron is a legend of the immortal path. Could it be that your demon sect's cultivators also need this? Moreover, cauldrons are usually only found among immortal cultivators. Right now, most of the immortal cultivators are in front of you. Although this female disciple has some potential, but, to his surprise, Garuda waved his hand and laughed. In the eyes of immortal cultivators like you, of course, this female disciple's aptitude is extremely ordinary. There's nothing special about her. But in the eyes of the demonic sect, this woman's constitution is special. Perhaps it's only useful to my cultivation. He then explained. In ancient times, immortal cultivators were limited by gender. They cultivated yang spiritual energy. As the ancient saying goes, solitary yang doesn't grow, solitary yin doesn't grow. Only by balancing yin and yang can one achieve the Tao. Thus, Sunmi used a lowly woman's body as a cauldron. Using yin and yang intercourse, they guided the woman's yin spiritual energy into her meridians. Of course, this woman had to have immortal cultivation. But my demon sect doesn't need to do that. As long as we can find a woman with a yin physique, we can use a secret technique to directly absorb the yin essence into our bodies. Of course, immortal cultivation emphasizes simplicity and harmony. No matter if it's the caster or the cauldron, both will benefit. But how much the cauldron benefits depends on the caster's intentions. He glanced at the frightened female disciple and continued, But my demon sect is different. This cauldron can only provide essence to the caster, but not any actual benefits. The world's spiritual energy has greatly decreased. It's rare to find someone with such meridians. This girl's meridians are even rarer. They won't be of much use to others, but they'll be of great use to my imperial wind technique. Afterwards, he cupped his hands towards Nun Jingyi and said, I've said so much just to ask Nun Jingyi to give me this ordinary disciple of the School of Fragrance. Although this woman has lost all her powers after becoming this heavenly king's cauldron, she is no different from an ordinary woman. Furthermore, this heavenly king guarantees that she will live out her life in glory. Seeing that Jingyi Shirtai didn't say anything, Garuda said, If Shirtai agrees, I will remember this favor. When the aroma cult needs me, I will do my best to help. Oh, I have a jade slip here that I just obtained. I haven't looked at it carefully yet. If Abbas doesn't mind, why don't you take a look at it first? As he spoke, Garuda took out a jade slip from his bosom. With a wave of his hand, the jade slip slowly flew to Nun Jingyi. Nun Jingyi took it and scanned it with her divine sense. She couldn't help but be startled. However, she immediately threw it back and said with a smile, "What if I don't agree?" "You don't agree?" Garuda looked around and sneered. "This heavenly king is giving face to your fragrant cult by asking for it in person. Although this heavenly king can't do anything to your fragrant cult, to be honest, if this heavenly king wanted to kidnap this woman while your sect protecting formation is open, it would be as easy as flipping my hand. Furthermore, there are so many female disciples in the fragrant cult. Perhaps there are many that suit this heavenly king's taste." Ha ha ha. Garuda was quite unscrupulous, but Jingyi Shirtai knew that what he said was absolutely reasonable. From the sparring session just now, Jingyi Shirtai already knew that Garuda's cultivation was inferior to hers. However, Garuda specialized in lightness techniques. His levitation technique was far from hers. It seemed that he had already mastered it, and was on the verge of breaking through the Imperial Wind technique. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so thick-skinned as to ask her for a disciple. With the Imperial Wind technique, Garuda could come and go as he pleased in the fragrant cult. This female disciple in front of her looked somewhat familiar. She definitely wasn't a disciple of Mo Nong Gong. She couldn't keep her by her side at all times. If Garuda had any ill intentions, he could kidnap her at any time. Rather than offending Garuda, why not do him a favor at no cost? Many thoughts ran through Jingyi Shirtai's mind. She then smiled and said, "We'll talk about this after the martial arts convention. Garuda, please unseal my female disciple's acupoints." Garuda frowned slightly. He looked at the people on the platform, and then looked at the people below the platform who were blocked by the restriction, and could not see what was happening on the platform. He smiled and said, "Well said, well said. I will wait for Abbas's choice." As he spoke, he waved his hand. A few wisps of smoke, almost invisible to the naked eye, flew out and hit the female disciple's major acupoints. With a cry, the female disciple was able to move. Her first reaction was to wrap her arms around her chest and curl into a ball. She cried out, "Sect leader, save me! Sect leader, save me! And don't panic. Everything will be decided by this sect. Come here." "Yes, sect leader." The girl trembled as she walked to Jingyi Shirtai's side. However, her gaze was still timid as she looked at Garuda, who was smiling brightly. "What's your name? Which hall on Lingering Fragrance Peak are you in?" Jingyi Shirtai asked kindly. "Disciple's name is Zhang Pinger. I'm in Lihua Hall on Lingering Fragrance Peak." The female disciple trembled as she answered. "Zhang Pinger?" Jingyi Shirtai frowned slightly. She had a faint impression of this name. That's right, this was the person that Great Elder Jinggang's youngest disciple, Yu Zhuochuan, was thinking about. It was also because of her that Great Elder Jinggang took his anger out on Zhang Xiaohua. In order to hunt down Zhang Xiaohua, he went to Lingering Fragrance Peak, and was killed by either the Tenryu sect or an immortal expert from between the clouds and the water. Femme fatale. For some reason, this phrase flashed through Jingyi Shirtai's mind when she saw Zhang Pinger's lovely and pitiful appearance. This sect leader remembers that you're the disciple of Lihua Hall's Vice Hall Master Yin Yin. How come you're here? Jingyi Shirtai was somewhat puzzled. Sect leader, today there are many guests on Huayu Peak. Yesterday, we received sect leader's decree and sent some disciples from various halls to Huayu Peak. Disciples' master and old acquaintances came to receive them. Disciple was curious, so I followed. Zhang Pinger's mood gradually stabilized and her voice no longer trembled. Alas, this sect leader understands. Jingyi Shirtai sighed. You can leave now. This sect leader will tell your master about this matter later. Sect leader Zhang Pinger's face immediately turned pale. She stretched out her hand and pulled Jingyi Shirtai's sleeve. Disciple doesn't want to go. Even if I die, I don't want to go. Jingyi Shirtai looked at Zhang Pinger's hand and frowned slightly. She paused for a moment and said warmly, "This sect leader didn't say that you should go. Don't worry, you can leave first." Yes. Sect leader Zhang Pinger's eyes were slightly teary and her face was increasingly pale. She bit her lips and didn't say anything in the end. She got up and hurried to the restriction outside the high platform. However, before she could reach it, her legs went soft and she almost fell. When she got up again, the tears in her eyes had been replaced by determination. After Zhang Pinger left, Jingyi Shirtai glanced at Garuda, and then at the sect leader who was looking down at the ground. She smiled and said, "All right, everyone has already tasted the icy soul wine. Next, there's our humble sect's new radish tea, heavenly ice dates and green leaf fruit. They're all great for cultivation." As she spoke, the other female disciples offered their trays. However, at this time, everyone was far away from Garuda, afraid that he would see through them again. Garuda still had the same expression as before. He didn't seem to be worried that Jing-yi wouldn't be moved. He only smiled and accepted the tea and spirit fruits. As for the other female disciples, he didn't care at all. If he could find someone with strange meridians, Zhang Pinger wouldn't be so precious anymore. Would he, Garuda, still need to run to the incense sect and lower himself? After the 4 people finished eating, each of them put away their food. Jingyi made a hand seal, and the restriction on the high platform gradually disappeared. The crowd below the platform, which had been clamoring nonstop, immediately fell silent. "All right, everyone, the food and wine are over. Next is the sword competition that everyone has been waiting for." In fact, when the 5 sects of the immortal Tao gathered here in the past, it was mostly to drink and discuss the sword. This time there are just more sects and more heroes. There's no difference. Of course, since there are more people, the rules need to be changed slightly. I won't say more about the specific arrangements. When the sword competition begins, I'll explain it to Nun Xuezhen. What I'm talking about here won't change during the sword competition. That is the reward. Whoosh! Everyone's emotions were stirred. The people inside Huayu Palace all craned their necks, wanting to see what Nun Jingyi would take out as a reward. The people in the square outside the palace all pricked up their ears, wanting to hear what Nun Jingyi would say. Nun Jingyi was very satisfied with the effect in front of her eyes. She waved her hand and a beautiful female disciple held a jade tray with a thin book on it. She lightly floated to the front of the high platform. Nun Jingyi pointed with her finger and smiled. "This is the result of the sword competition. It's the rarely seen Jianghu's top internal cultivation method, the breaking blade force." Whoosh! Another sound rang out. This time, it was even louder than the previous one. Everyone below the high platform began to talk at once. At this time, a voice rang out from the side. "Nun Jingyi, this is your fault. This breaking blade force is the secret cultivation method of our Shindao sect. How could you take it out as a reward?" The one who spoke was Bai Yanqiu. At this time, Bai Yanqiu's face was slightly red and his eyes flashed with incomparable anger. "Bai Zhangmen? Don't be mistaken. This breaking blade force is incomparably precious. As long as you practice the 9 layers of this cultivation method to the peak, you'll be able to step onto the path of immortality. It's definitely one of the few internal cultivation methods in Jianghu. However, it's only the secret cultivation method of the Shindao sect. This doesn't seem to have anything to do with between the clouds and the water. Didn't Bai Zhangmen remind me just now that you're between the clouds and the water, and not the Shindao sect?" Nun Jingyi explained with a smile. But Bai Yanqiu was speechless. This breaking blade force was the secret cultivation method of the Shindao sect. After the Shindao sect was destroyed, it disappeared. Today, there was only a fragment of the between the clouds and the water. If this breaking blade force was obtained by other sects in Jianghu, perhaps the 6th sect of the path of immortality would be born. Thank you. If you like this work, you're welcome to cast a recommendation vote or a monthly vote at Chidian.com. Chapter 1037. Bai Yanqiu's eyes burned with anger when she saw the breaking blade force in the hands of the Aroma sect disciple, but she had no excuse. She had repeatedly corrected Nun Jingyi. differentiating the Shundao sect from the between the clouds and the water. She didn't expect that she would overreach herself and lose the best chance to ask for her sect's secret manual. Looking at Bai Yanqiu's dejected and angry appearance, Jingyi Nun ignored her and said to the crowd, "This cultivation method is most suitable for men to practice. The hero who gets third place in this sword competition will be able to take away the blade breaking force." Hee, of course, how to practice it is none of my business. After that, Nun Jingyi waved her hand, and another female disciple stepped forward. This time, the item on the tray was covered by a silk scarf, so no one could see it. However, there were still some people present who had expressions of astonishment on their faces. Bai Yanqiu was naturally one of them. When the female disciple came to the side of the platform, Nun Jingyi waved her hand and lifted the scarf, revealing 5 fist-sized stones. The stones were of different colors: yellow, cyan, blue, red, and brown. What are these? Most of the people in Huayu Palace were stunned. Since the third place in the sword competition could get the breaking blade force, the second place in the sword competition would get it. It should be more precious than the breaking blade force. But these 5 stones looked very ordinary. What was so precious about them? However, some of the monks of the Dalan Temple, some of the disciples of Between the Clouds and the Water, and some of the disciples of the Aroma sect's Mo Xiangong stared at the 5 stones with burning passion in their eyes. They were like mice that saw rice. Nun Jingyi looked at Bai Yanqiu, Master Chongsheng, and Zhang San, who was also tempted. She smiled and said, "Everyone, you must know that the breaking blade force is a key to entering the Tao through martial arts. But how do you practice it after entering the Tao? The Tao of immortality is different from the Tao of martial arts. Internal energy can be generated on its own. The Tao of immortality's internal energy is called vital energy. Although some can be generated in the meridians, the normal method is to absorb it from the outside. The absorbed energy is called the Qi of heaven and earth. In ancient times, the world was full of heaven and earth. People of the Tao of immortality could directly absorb the Qi of heaven and earth and refine it in their meridians, turning it into vital energy. Everyone knows the power of internal energy, but let me tell you, vital energy power is 100 times stronger than internal energy. Perhaps it's not appropriate to put it this way. If internal energy is like a baby, then true energy is like an adult. Not only is there a difference in strength, there is also a difference in ability. Moreover, vital energy is the foundation of all cultivators of the Tao of immortality. All magic and divine abilities are based on the control of vital energy. Now the Tao of heaven and earth has changed greatly. The Tao of immortality has been annihilated. People of the Tao of immortality can't directly absorb vital energy from heaven and earth. So how do they practice? They absorb vital energy from these stones. These stones are called vital stones in the Tao of immortality. The vital energy of heaven and earth contained in these vital stones is purer than that of heaven and earth and easier to refine. That is to say, with the breaking blade force just now, you can take one step into the Tao of immortality. With these 5 vital stones, you can completely enter the Tao of immortality. Boom! The crowd exploded like a pot of boiling water and began to discuss. Perhaps there were people from the famous sects in Huayu Palace who knew about the Tao of immortality, but they had never seen 5 vital stones in perfect condition. Needless to say, the sects in the square were even more so. What Nun Jingyi said just now was basically to let them know what the Tao of immortality was and how to practice it. This was actually to cater to their curiosity of coming to the Tao of immortality. With the help of Huayu Palace's formation, Nun Jingyi's divine sense saw the curious expressions of the people outside the square. She couldn't help but smile. The Tao of immortality hadn't appeared in Jianghu for a long time, so the sect's fear of the Tao of immortality had greatly decreased. This time, she took out the Tao of immortality to broaden their horizons and let them know the power of the Tao of immortality. After waiting for a while, her voice grew softer and softer. Nun Jingyi said, "The things in this world are not metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. The same goes for vital stones. Yellow vital stones are metal, green vital stones are wood, blue vital stones are water, red vital stones are fire, and brown vital stones are earth. The breaking blade force is a metal attribute technique. although absorbing the other 4 types of vital stones can increase one's cultivation. If you use the yellow metal vital stone, you'll get twice the result with half the effort. In addition, it's not that I'm boasting, but the vital energy of heaven and earth is scarce, so the vital stones in this world are gradually being worn away. In the 10,000 years since the Tao of Immortality was destroyed, vital stones have become rare. These 5 vital stones with all 5 elements are the only things I have. I only took them out for this martial arts convention to share with you. Good. The leader of an unknown sect stood up and clapped his hands. The fragrant cult is indeed a great sect of the Tao of Immortality. It lives up to its reputation. This kind of style is rare in the world. My Flat Mountain faction is truly impressed. If the fragrant cult needs anything in the future, our humble sect will not refuse. That's right. The fragrant cult is indeed generous. They share the secrets of the Tao of Immortality with us. We also admire them for a moment. There was endless praise for the fragrant cult. Of the other 4 people on the stage, Garuda was sitting on a chair. He looked sideways and did not look forward. He was only looking left and right. No one knew if he was looking for Zhang Pinger. The elder still put his palms together and lowered his head without saying a word. Zhang San's face was as calm as still water. He looked coldly at the clamor below. Bai Yanxiu was biting his lips. His eyes narrowed. No one knew what he was thinking. Well, this is the reward for the 2nd place in the sword conference tournament. The cult has finished. Everyone, let's see the reward for the champion. This sentence piqued everyone's curiosity. Even Bai Yanxiu and the others looked sideways. They all wanted to know what other good things the fragrant cult could take out on top of the 5 elements primordial stone. The 3rd item was placed in a jade box. Bai Yanxiu and the others' divine senses were blocked by the jade box's restriction. They could not see what was inside. At this time, Nun Jingyi said, I just said that the cultivation of the Tao of Immortality relies on the qi of heaven and earth and the primordial stone. But once you have the cultivation, what do you rely on to fight? In martial arts, you can transfer your inner strength to your hands and feet. You can also use your strength to use weapons like sabers, spears, swords, halberds, and so on. Similarly, you can transfer your inner strength to weapons like sabers and swords. In the Tao of Immortality, your qi can be used to form spells. You can also use your qi to activate weapons like sabers, spears, swords, and halberds. It's a bit troublesome to explain these weapons. You can think of them as weapons. By the way, when Bai Zhangmen between the clouds and the water was sparring with me, the elders, and the Garuda King in the air, the weapon used was a magic weapon. When the crowd heard this, how could they not know that there was a magic weapon inside the jade box? When they thought that if they won 1st place in the sword competition, they would be rewarded with a magic weapon that could be used to fly around in the air. Everyone couldn't help but blush and their blood boiled. Of course, the participants of the sword competition this time are all the younger generation in the world of martial artists. If we bring out our famous enchanted vessel, we will be showing our sincerity, but the disciples might not be able to use it, and it will taint our sincerity. So, after careful consideration, we have decided to bring out a replica of the Purple Phoenix hairpin personally created by a senior from the Path of Immortals as the prize for the champion of the sword competition. Everyone present knew about the Purple Phoenix hairpin. When they heard Nun Jingyi mention it, they were all surprised. However, when they heard that it was a replica, they showed a look of realization. The others were also disappointed when they heard that it was a replica. When Nun Jingyi saw this, she smiled and said, "Everyone, don't underestimate this replica. Its power isn't bad, but it requires a lot less qi. It's suitable for disciples who have just entered the Tao of Immortality." As she spoke, she waved her hand and the jade box flew into her hand. She cast several spells and unlocked the restriction on the jade box. Nun Jingyi opened the jade box, revealing a purple phoenix hairpin carved with exquisite patterns. It was exactly the same as the purple phoenix hairpin in Zhang Xiaohua's arms. Nun Jingyi held the replica purple phoenix hairpin in her hand and raised her head to look at it. She casually waved her hand and a weak bolt of lightning suddenly appeared out of thin air, following the direction of the purple phoenix hairpin. After a crackling sound, there was a bang sound. Not far from Nanjing-yi, a jade chair was first entangled by the lightning, and then exploded into several pieces. The person sitting on the chair had already stood up because he was greedy for the magic weapon in the jade box, but now he was greatly shocked. The whole place was in an uproar. The lightning was incomparably fast. When everyone saw it clearly, it had already hit the chair. If it had been aimed at a person, there would have been no time to dodge. Moreover, the distance was so far. After being hit, the power was not small. It was simply incomparable to the hidden weapons commonly seen in the Jianghu. It really is an immortal weapon. It's extraordinary. This was the unanimous thought in everyone's mind. However, Nanjing-yi did not stop. She waved the replica purple phoenix hairpin in her hand a few more times, and a small net of electric arcs appeared in the air with crackling sounds. The people under the net were so frightened that they could only shrink their necks and retreat one after another, afraid that the net would fall and hit them. However, Nanjing-yi smiled. The replica purple phoenix hairpin in her hand swayed slightly. The net of electric arcs seemed to be pulled by ropes and floated around in the air. As the people moved, it also moved and covered their heads. After a while, when she saw that the people's foreheads were covered in sweat, Nanjing-yi no longer teased them. With a wave of her hand, the net of electric arcs fell directly to the empty jade chair that someone had been sitting on just now. This time, the movement was even greater. After a crackling sound, the jade chair exploded. This time, the explosion was smaller than before, and there were even more fragments. What do you think, everyone? Although this replica purple phoenix hairpin is not as powerful as the real one, it's still an elementary immortal weapon. It's perfect for new disciples to use. It's also the best weapon to be awarded to the champion of the sword conference. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to cast a recommendation vote or a monthly vote. Chapter 1038. Jing Yi's words were to the point. Although the real purple phoenix hairpin was powerful, it required a huge amount of qi. It was impossible to use it unless one was at the middle stage of the qi refining stage. When Zhang Xiaohua was at the third or fourth stage of the qi refining stage, she could only use jade talismans. The first time she used a magic tool was the dragon binding hoop. She was already at the middle stage of the qi refining stage, but she could only activate the dragon binding hoop and use it to trap others. She couldn't release the true fire within the dragon binding hoop. The middle stage of the qi refining stage was an inconceivable existence in the current era of the immortal Tao. How could the younger generation of disciples from the various sects hope to catch up to her? Therefore, not to mention the real purple phoenix hairpin, even if the dragon binding hoop or the jade talisman were here, they might not be able to use it. In fact, when Jing Yi introduced the imitation of the purple phoenix hairpin, she deliberately avoided mentioning one thing. That was spiritual sense. While using a magic tool required jinqi, controlling a magic tool relied more on one's spiritual sense. The lightning net created by the imitation of the purple phoenix hairpin required precise control over one's spiritual sense to be able to be executed. As for spiritual sense, unless one was at the late stage of the qi refining stage, or used a sect's secret technique, it was impossible to generate spiritual sense. Although Jing Gang was older than Jing Yi, her cultivation was limited. She only managed to cultivate a weak spiritual sense with the help of the incense cult's secret technique. She was far inferior to Jing Yi. Before the incense cult's defensive formation was destroyed, Jing Yi received the formation and the cult's secret technique. Her spiritual sense was also incomparably powerful. It was even more powerful than Zhang Xiaohua's. Unfortunately, the dragon vein was absorbed by Zhang Xiaohua, and the restriction was broken by Zhang Xiaohua. Jing Yi's spiritual sense was immediately beaten back to its original state. But then again, even now, Jing Yi's spiritual sense was much weaker than Zhang Xiaohua's. In the eyes of the Jianghu disciples, she was still an immortal-like existence. She was far from a height they could reach in their lifetime. Jing Yi put the imitation hairpin back into the jade box and smiled. Wait until the hero here can escape from the top scorer. I'll personally give this hairpin and the manual on how to use it to him. Subsequently, the 3 female disciples placed the trays in their hands on the jade table beside the high platform, bowed and retreated. Nun Jingyi turned around and asked, Elder, would you like to say a few words? Ba. Elder Chong stood up and nodded. To tell you the truth, the incense cult's move this time. It's very generous, far beyond old monk's expectations. Since this old monk is already like this, I'm sure everyone here is tempted as well. Ong! A loud laughter rang out. The people below the stage did not expect Elder Chung to be so straightforward, and they all roared with laughter. Isn't that so? My eyes are burning and my hands are itching, someone said boldly. Yes, everyone wants it. However, there are only 3 prizes. Therefore, I don't need to tell you that the sword competition will be very exciting. Everyone will be nervous. Then, Elder Chong changed the topic. However, this sword competition is a competition, not a battle of life and death. No matter what grudges you have in Jianghu, when you're here, you must forget the past. Here, Old Monk will reiterate the principle of the sword competition. You can't kill. If someone is merciless and takes the opponent's life, then you'll be disqualified from the sword competition immediately. You'll be expelled from Huayu Palace. Nun Jingyi and Garuda's expressions did not change, as if they already knew. Bai Yanqiu thought for a moment, looked at the audience and asked, Master Chongsheng, what if someone accidentally kills? Bai Zhongmen, the sword competition is the sword competition. It's about the word competition. This rule has been followed for thousands of years without exception. Whether it's intentional or not, you must be expelled. Elder Chongsheng said without any trace of politeness. Bai Yanqiu could only nod and look at Zhang San. Zhang San seemed to be thinking about something else, and did not pay attention. All right, Old Monk has finished speaking. I wish for the sword competition to end successfully, and for all of you to have your wishes come true. After Elder Chongsheng sat down, Nun Jingyi looked at the other 3 people. They were all silent, so she said, The sword competition begins. As she spoke, she struck a spell on the high platform. With a bang, the high platform shook slightly. Then in Huayu Palace and the square, between the gaps of the audience, dozens, and even hundreds of high platforms about 10 feet tall rose gradually. These high platforms were pulled up from the ground and rose little by little, until they were about 10 feet tall. The audience below the high platform was stunned at first, but then they understood. They all looked at the high platform that was used as a fighting ring with interest. When the high platform stabilized, a white figure leaped onto the middle one. It was Nun Xuezhen, who was wearing a white palace dress and a mask. Nun Xuezhen stood on the high platform and bowed slightly to the audience. She said, According to the order of the hierarch, I, Xuezhen, will be in charge of this sword competition. Now, I will tell you the specific rules. As soon as she finished speaking, the female disciple of the aroma sect who had served tea and snacks appeared again. But this time she was holding a brush, ink, paper, and inkstone. She placed them on everyone's table. Nun Xuezhen pointed at the brush, ink, paper, and inkstone and said, In this sword competition, except for the Pai sect, the Tenria sect, the Dalan Temple, between the clouds and the water, and the Righteous Alliance, there are 4 places to participate. The other sects and schools only have 2 places to participate. This has been explained when the disciples of the Pai sect sent the invitations. Please write down the names of the disciples of your sects and schools who will participate in the sword competition. Then find a fighting ring like the one I am standing on. At the bottom of the fighting ring, there is a small round hole. You can put your name in there. There are 50 fighting rings like this inside Huayu Palace and outside the palace. Inside Huayu Palace, you can put 10 names on each fighting ring. Outside the palace, you can put 20 names on each fighting ring. Once the fighting ring is full, the small hole in the fighting ring will close. There are 230 sects in Huayu Palace. Each sect has 2 people, so there are 460 disciples participating in the sword competition. There are 50 fighting rings, so there are 40 empty spots. There are 512 sects outside the palace, so there are 1,024 disciples participating in the sword competition. There are 24 more disciples in the fighting rings. Please put the names of these 24 disciples into the fighting rings inside Huayu Palace. The small hole in the fighting rings will close after I finish speaking for 30 minutes. Only the disciples who put their names in during this time are qualified to participate in the sword competition. Otherwise, they will be considered as not participating. Each fighting ring will have 10 or 20 people. The fighting rings will be arranged by themselves. The other sects will guarantee fairness. For the sake of fairness, the 4 disciples of the other sect and the 16 disciples of the other 4 sects will not participate in the first round. Once the final winner has been determined in each arena, they will participate in the second round of the sword competition for the top 120 disciples. Nun Shuizhen continued to talk about the rules of each round of the sword competition. In the end, she said, "Just now the leader of the other sect announced the rewards for the top 3. According to the rules of the sword competition, there will be 100 winners in the first round. These 100 disciples will receive 1 Yuhuandan pill, 1 small bone congealing pill, and 1 small revitalizing pill from the Dalan Temple as a reward. Alright, please write down the names of your disciples participating in the sword competition on the paper, and put them in the fighting rings. The first round of the sword competition is about to begin." As she spoke, a disciple of the incense cult brought a lit incense stick to the fighting ring where Nun Shuizhen was. When they heard Nun Shuizhen mention that the rewards for winning the first round of the sword competition were the legendary healing pills of the incense cult and the Dalan Temple, the crowd was in an uproar. The 3 rewards that Nun Jingyi had shown were indeed very tempting. Everyone was looking forward to it, but after all, not everyone had the hope to reach the last step. The 3 rewards were very likely to be won by the disciples of the 5 super sects in the end. On the contrary, Nun Shuizhen's words about the rewards for the final winner of the first round of the sword competition rekindled the fire of hope in everyone's hearts. Of course, 1 out of 10 people in Huayu Palace, 1 out of 20 people outside Huayu Palace. All the young disciples present were outstanding disciples of their respective sections. Almost every one of them believed that they would definitely be the final winner. The 3 pills each represented a life, so how could they not be tempted? Therefore, when Nun Shuizhen said that they could begin, the leaders of each sect immediately picked up their brushes and wrote down the names of their disciples as fast as they could. They took 1 for themselves, and the other elder took 1 for themselves. Then, each of them used their lightness skills and threw their names into the fighting rings that they had already planned out. That's right, the sword competition was also about strategy. 2 disciples from each sect absolutely could not be placed in the same fighting ring. Moreover, were there any familiar sects nearby? Were there any disciples from other sects that they knew the ins and outs of? This all needed to be considered in the time it took for a stick of incense to burn. The sects that were closer to Huayu Palace had already taken the lead. They ran into the palace and threw the names of their 2 disciples into the fighting rings. Nonsense, the palace only chose 1 out of 10. Although their martial arts might be a little higher, their chances were still much higher. For a moment, the inside and outside of Huayu Palace was in chaos. Occasionally, there were people who used their lightness skills and almost collided with each other. There were also people who had just chosen a fighting ring and were about to throw their names in. In the end, they were thrown in by a hidden weapon technique from far away. Then, the small hole immediately disappeared. This person could only turn around and curse. He did not dare to delay, and went to look for another fighting ring. As a result, in the end, more than 10 people ran out of Huayu Palace and shouted, "Where is the fighting ring? Where is the fighting ring?" It was because the smart leaders in the square had filled up the fighting rings in Huayu Palace. These people in Huayu Palace had no fighting ring to throw their names into. They had no choice but to look for the 1 out of 20 fighting rings in the square. The funny thing was, in the square, there were 512 sects and 1,024 people. They were all silent and stood there obediently, adhering to the rule of not speaking during the sword competition. Please cast a monthly vote, a recommendation vote, a collection, a tip. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to cast a recommendation vote or a monthly vote. Chapter 1039. The elders and sect leaders of the various sects saw this and knew what these people were thinking. With a stomp of their feet, they split up and rushed towards the 50 arenas in the plaza. 50 fighting rings were not a lot, but they covered the entire square, and they had to search one by one. How could they be fast? These 10+ people had a tacit understanding, and each of them found a different area. After a while, the burning candles were extinguished and the holes in the 100 arenas disappeared. One of the sect leaders looked on helplessly as the hole in front of him gradually became smaller. His heart grew anxious and he rubbed the piece of paper in his hand, and actually used a hidden weapon technique to throw it into the hole. Seeing that the ball of paper was about to fall into the hole that had not completely disappeared, the sect leader's face revealed a smile. But at this moment, out of nowhere, a gust of wind suddenly blew past and blew the ball of paper askew. With a paw sound, it hit the spot where the hole had disappeared. The sect leader's face immediately turned pale, and he stood there in a daze. He looked at the clear and windless square, and then looked at the group of people who were gloating at his misfortune. His face immediately turned ashen. He didn't say anything and just looked at the various sects beside the stage. Then, without saying a word, he turned around and returned to Huayu Palace. "What's wrong with that old man, Xiao?" One of them was indignant and said in a low voice. "He didn't go in himself and now he wants to find trouble with others? Look at him, I'm afraid he's blaming us for this. Who knows if he'll attack our sects once he leaves Chuanxiang cult. It's just Qingshan sect. They have some connections with the Righteous Alliance. Now that Chuanxiang cult has appeared in Jianghu, can the Righteous Alliance still control Jianghu?" That's right. The Dalan Temple was a master who ignored the Righteous Alliance and allowed them to do whatever they wanted. Now that Chuanxiang cult has appeared, they will not let the Righteous Alliance be the only sect. Sect leaders, I think sect leader who is right. We need to discuss this. Although Qingshan sect is not big, it's not something any of us can deal with. Why don't we? Brother Yu is right. After the martial arts convention, we need to meet up and leave together. Don't fall into Qingshan sect's trap. Sigh, when the fragrance spreads, Jianghu is in chaos. The incense cult had only just held a martial arts assembly. They had not even taken a step out of Dianqi Lake, but they had already stirred up a lot of trouble. This didn't include the Misty School that was rushing to Misty Peak. When the sect leaders returned to Huayu Palace with hatred in their hearts, Abbess Shuizhen's voice was heard again. "Everyone, the name list for each arena has been decided. As for which Xiaoxia and which Xiaoxia will fight, it is up to the arena to decide. The cult of incense will not interfere. However, my perfuming school will send an inner disciple to act as a witness for each battle arena. This disciple will not judge the outcome of the battle arena, but will only place the winner's name back into the arena. As for the outcome of the battle between the two Xiaoxia in the arena, it is also simple. As long as one of them falls out of the arena within the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, the remaining one will be the winner. If neither of them falls out of the arena within the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, then, I'm sorry, but both of them will be disqualified from the next round. There will be no incense burning in each arena. When the battle begins, the arena will descend by itself. When the arena is level with the ground, it will only take the time it takes for an incense stick to burn." "Well, sect leaders, is there anything else you want to ask?" A voice called out. "Abbess Shuizhen, if both of them fall out of the arena, then will the one who falls out of the arena be the winner? If both of them fall out of the arena, then both of them will be disqualified from the next round," Abbess Shuizhen said firmly. After waiting for a while and seeing that no one else was asking, Abbess Shuizhen said, "Okay, then the battle arena will begin now. If there is anything special, please ask the perfuming school disciple in charge of the arena." As he spoke, 100 young disciples dressed in palace attire with veils covering their faces filed in and walked to their respective arenas. Their bodies did not move, but they floated to the edge of the arenas and stood on the edge of the arenas with the tips of their feet. Their entire bodies were outside of the arenas. Good. Seeing such a high level of Qinggong, very few people praised. Seeing that all the disciples were in place, Abbess Shuizhen looked back. At this time, The restriction on the high platform where Abbess Jingy and the others were standing had been removed. Abbess Jingy nodded slightly. Abbess Shuezhen took out a 3-inch-long stick from her bosom and pointed it in the air. Pa! With a crisp sound, the 100 arenas released a pale white screen of light at the same time. After a while, 2 lines of large words appeared on each arena. Su Jingwen of the Firmament Dock, Lu Cheng of the Qi Huanmen, beside the arena where Abbess Shuezhen stood. Everyone looked at the large words on the screen of light in shock and read them out loud. What? Is it really chosen by the arena itself? One person couldn't believe his eyes. Nonsense, it's already the name. What's there to not believe? The way of immortality is really magical. While everyone was talking, 2 good-looking disciples stepped out of the crowd and flew onto the arena. They cupped their hands and saluted to everyone. Then they walked onto the arena. One of them cupped his hands and said, "I am Lu of Qi Huamen." While Lu Cheng was complaining inwardly, he suddenly felt the air behind his feet. He was shocked. He was at the edge of the arena. If he took half a step back, he would fall off the arena. Seeing that he couldn't dodge the kick, Lu Cheng of Qi Huamen clenched his teeth. He didn't circulate his internal energy, but jumped forward to grab the leg of the Heaven's Vault Dock's disciple even if he got injured. The Heaven's Dock's disciple already had a plan in mind. First, he would reveal an opening and send his leg towards Lu Cheng. This was just a feint. When Lu Cheng's hand reached his eyes, he immediately lowered his body and kicked Lu Cheng's leg that was still standing on the stage. Lu Cheng's upper body was still on the stage, but the lower part of his body was outside the stage. At this moment, Lu Cheng didn't have time to grab the disciple of the Firmament Dock. He stretched out his hand and tried to grab the edge of the arena. Seeing this, the disciple of the Firmament Dock pointed his scabbard at Lu Cheng's forehead. Seeing that the scabbard was about to touch his forehead, Lu Cheng sighed helplessly and let go of his left hand. He somersaulted in the air and landed steadily on the ground. At this moment, the disciple of the Firmament Dock stood up and cupped his hands. "I am Su Jingwen of the Firmament Dock." From the moment Lu Cheng cupped his hands to the moment he was kicked out of the arena, only a few breaths of time had passed. The disciple of the Firmament Dock didn't introduce himself too late. "Senior sister of the Incense School. This guy, he cheated," Lu Cheng said to the disciple of the Incense School, who was standing at the edge of the arena. The disciple of the Firmament Dock, Su Jingwen, stood on the arena with a smile and didn't say anything. The disciple of the Incense School looked at him and said coldly, "You have already won. Get down from the arena." "Yes, senior sister." Su Jingwen smiled and jumped down from the arena. The disciple of the Incense School thought for a while and said, "Senior sister Shuezhen said that as long as you leave the arena, you lose. You don't have to care about anything else." After saying that, he jumped down from the arena and wrote a piece of paper. He slapped the surface of the arena and a small hole appeared. He threw the piece of paper into the hole and jumped back into the arena. After the small hole was sealed, 2 more names appeared on the white screen. This time, the 2 of them weren't as careless as Lu Cheng from the Firmament Dock. They fought carefully. Although there were 100 battles, the martial arts of these young disciples. How could they enter senior sister Jing Yi's eyes? She glanced at them and looked at the people beside her. She smiled and said, "Everyone, please take a seat. I will be back soon." Garuda glanced at senior sister Jing Yi and ignored her. The elder smiled and said, "Senior sister Jing Yi, please go ahead." Bai Yanqiu and Zhang San bowed slightly. Senior sister Jing Yi walked down from the arena. Peacock, Chen Chen and the other disciples followed behind her and entered a small hall in Huayu Palace. The moment she entered the small hall, Nun Jing Yi's face immediately became gloomy. She silently walked to a chair, but before she could sit down, she stretched out her hand and slammed it on the table beside her. The table didn't change at first, but after a few breaths, it suddenly collapsed and turned into powder that fell to the ground. Everyone was shocked. Even Chen Chen shrunk his neck and didn't dare to speak. "This is too much." Senior sister Jing Yi stood in front of the chair with her back to the crowd and said angrily. Perhaps it was because she had vented her anger on the table, but at this time, although senior sister Jing Yi was furious, her tone also seemed to be helpless. Leader Peacock looked at the crowd and said, I wonder, is there anything I can help with? Could it be because of the sword competition? Senior Sister Jing-yi thought for a moment and sighed. In the martial world, there will always be things that are difficult to settle. If you can't tolerate what others can't, then you must have the ability to do what others can't. Peacock, you must remember this in the future. Yes, leader, I understand. Peacock answered nervously. Alright, all of you. Go out and call In from the distant fire palace. Deputy Palace Master In. Yuyan was stunned and nodded in response. She was the first to go out and the others followed. Peacock, Chun, you two stay. Senior Sister Jing-yi called out as the crowd walked out. Peacock looked at Chun, stopped and walked back into the hall. The other disciples knew that the two of them had different identities, so naturally, they didn't say much and left quietly. After a while, In from the distant fire palace still hadn't arrived. Someone else did. She stood outside the small hall and seemed to be thinking and hesitating. A voice came from inside the hall. Xiaqing? What's the matter? Chapter 1040. When Xiaqing heard the voice of Nun Jingyi, the hesitation on her face turned into determination. She clenched her teeth and walked into the hall. Xiaqing, you've been loitering at the door for a long time. Is there something urgent? Nun Jingyi's face didn't look good. Sect leader looking at Nun Jingyi, Xiaqing panicked and stammered. It's nothing, I just came to see if there's anything I can do. Nun Jingyi sneered. Xiaqing, if there's anything, just tell me. I'll make the decision for you on Huayu Peak. This Nun Jingyi's power had already scared Xiaqing out of her wits. But now, she had no choice but to throw herself on the ground and cry. Sect Master, please show mercy. Disciple. Disciple asks Sect Master to allow Disciple to participate in the sword competition. Nun Jingyi was stunned. She looked at Peacock and Chun, who were also at a loss and shook their heads slightly. Xiaqing, get up first. Nun Jingyi said with a pleasant face. Didn't I already say it before? Let the male disciples of Ruijin Palace go. It's better if the female disciples of Emoshian Palace don't go on stage. Do you have other ideas? Sect leader Xiaqing stood up straight and looked at the three people in the hall. She sucked her lips and said, Sect leader, since the failure of the refining heart cave, I've been anxious. I want to find an opportunity on the path of immortality. I know I can't compare with Senior Peacock, Senior Chun, and even Junior Yuyan, but my heart is no worse than theirs. The three senior sisters have already obtained the inheritance of the path of immortality. I also want to fight for a chance in the sword competition. This Nun Jingyi sucked in a breath of cold air. She didn't expect that Xiaqing, a disciple who usually didn't show off, would have such a strong desire for Taoism. After thinking for a while, she said, I've already explained to you about the sword competition before. The blade-breaking force belongs to the Godly Knife sect. Although it's an excellent secret manual for practicing martial arts, it's only effective for male disciples. Female disciples won't have much effect if they practice it. Our Aroma cult also has secret manuals on martial arts. Oh, Xiaqing, you want to fight for those 5 elements primordial stones? Abbess Jing-yi suddenly realized. Yes, Lord Hierarch. Seeing that Jing-yi Shirtai didn't have any angry expression, Xiaqing was secretly happy. She said, Disciple knows that Sir Hierarch is magnanimous. Our Emoshian Palace also has a lot of secret manuals on martial arts. Once disciples' martial arts reach a certain level, they can be bestowed. Although disciples' internal strength cultivation method can't compare to Senior Sister Peacock's and Senior Sister Chen's heavenly mortal cultivation method, Disciple is confident that Disciple will be bestowed by Sir Hierarch in her lifetime. So, you want to get the 5 elements primordial stones first to lay the foundation for your future cultivation. Disciple indeed has such a plan. I hope Sir Hierarch can grant my wish. How's Elder Jing Fan's martial arts? What level of attainment was the Mortal Heart Sutra that she cultivated? Why didn't our cult give her the 5 elements primordial stones? Have you ever thought about it? Disciple, Disciple knows that the 5 elements primordial stones are very precious. Even our Emotian Palace doesn't have many left. And the rest are for senior sister Peacock, senior sister Chun, and junior sister Yuyen to cultivate. Not to mention Disciple, even Elder Jing Fan, and the previous great Elder Jing Gang didn't have any, so you want to take advantage of this sword competition to get the primordial stones first? But such a precious thing. Why don't we keep it for ourselves? Instead, we give it to outsiders? Disciple didn't think too much about it. Disciple only thought that the primordial stones are very few. If we don't fight for it now, in the future, there may not be such an opportunity. So, Disciple steeled her heart to beg Sir Hierarch. Good. Nun Jingyi clapped her hands and said, seeking the Tao always has a sequence. If you fight for it first, you'll cut off the path of others. If you don't fight for it, others will fight for it. Since you came to beg our cult, what's wrong with us agreeing to your request? Thank you, Sir Hierarch. Xiaqing was so excited that she almost cried. Don't be in such a hurry to thank me. I haven't finished speaking. Nun Jingyi said lightly. Our cult gave you a chance this time, which is equivalent to giving you the chance to cultivate the Tao of Immortality. In the future, when you're successful in martial arts and have the chance to enter the Tao of Immortality, our cult, Disciple knows. Disciple doesn't dare to hope that Sir Hierarch will give me another chance. Our Mo Ning Palace has a lot of disciples. Disciple has received this chance and won't fight for the next one. It's good that you know. Then you may leave. In a while, during the sword competition, you'll replace Yuan Hong. Tell him now. This is our order. Disciple understands. Disciple will go now. Xiaqing smiled and ran out after thanking her. Remember not to wear a veil and don't wear a palace dress. Nun Jingyi's voice came from behind. Yes, Disciple knows. Xiaqing was in a good mood. After Xiaqing left, Peacock said softly, Sir Hierarch, if Xiaqing wins the 5 elements primordial stone, then Sir Hierarch's plan will be disrupted? Sigh, yes, it will inevitably be affected. Nun Jingyi sighed. This girl is so focused on cultivating the Tao of Immortality. How can she not understand that the 5 elements primordial stone is a bait that our cult is giving to the entire Jianghu? Isn't that so? Even I understand. How can Xiaqing not know? Chun was also puzzled. She has walked into a dead end. Nun Jingyi shook her head. This girl met the immortal sect's Huan, senior in Huanshu, and saw the magic of the immortal sect. How can she think so much? Forget it, Sir Hierarch, don't worry. It's good to let her go to the arena, and let the people of Jianghu see the power of our inner disciples. Don't we still have the imitation purple phoenix hairpin and the broken sword force? They are also very useful. Hehe, Nun Jingyi sneered. Xiaqing is a bit narrow-minded. She thinks that our cult doesn't send disciples from Emotian Palace, and only sent disciples from Ruijin Palace. This means that the disciples of the other sects are no match for the disciples of Emotian Palace. On the other hand, I don't know if the Tenryu sect will participate. If they participate, won't they take away all those things? No, Sir Hierarch, it's useless for them to take those things. Chun smiled. Then, we have to consider between the clouds and the water. Do you think that Bai Yanqiu will tolerate the broken sword force that originally belonged to him being lost in Jianghu? Since she wants to keep the broken sword force, how can she let go of the 5 elements primordial stone? Hehe, Peacock, among the disciples in white brought by between the clouds and the water, are some of them the ones who tried to kill you outside Dianqi Lake that day? Yes, Sir Hierarch, your disciple saw them a long time ago. One of them was Liang Xingshu, who tried to kill me that day. It's just that the other 3 who besieged me are not here. See, Liang Xingshu's martial arts are not worse than yours. Although you have received the inheritance and can be considered a person of immortality, your foundation is still shallow and you can't show any magical powers. Even if you fight with Liang Xingshu now, you may not be able to win. Xiaqing is even less likely. I'm afraid Xiaqing may not be able to do as she wishes. Sigh, Peacock suddenly thought of a saying. She was too smart and gave Qing her life instead. At this time, Nun Jingyi raised her eyebrows and looked at the entrance of the small hall. After a while there was the sound of light footsteps and someone asked, "Sir Hierarch, your subordinate is the deputy of the fiery temple, In. Why are you looking for me?" Is this In from the fiery temple? Come in." "Yes, your subordinate obeys." When In came in, Peacock and Chin bowed slightly. "Deputy Temple Master In, do you have a disciple called Zhangpinger?" Nun Jingyi asked directly. In was startled and said in a panic, "This subordinate does have a disciple called Zhangpinger, but this child's temperament is calm and she doesn't cause trouble." Previously, the matter with Great Elder Jinggang's disciple and the Protector's disciple was all a misunderstanding. This subordinate has already punished Zhangpinger. She shouldn't bother Emotian Palace's Protector's disciple and Miss Xixia. Seeing that In had said so much, Nun Jingyi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. After In finished speaking, she said, "I have already punished all of you for that matter. I won't mention it again in the future. Today I'm looking for you because of another matter regarding Zhangpinger." "Ah." In was stunned and blurted out, "This time, which hall's disciple is it?" "Which hall's disciple?" Nun Jingyi laughed coldly. "It's Garuda." "Garuda? He's not a very famous disciple. May I ask which hall this disciple is from, Sir Hierarch? Your subordinate will punish them right away." In was very puzzled. Garuda of the Tenryu sect. Not to mention you. Even I want to punish him. When you go, remember to bring me along." "Ah? Garuda? What's his relationship with Zhangpinger?" In was stunned. Thus, Nun Jingyi recounted everything that had happened on the platform. Before In could speak, Chin said angrily, "Sir Hierarch, how can this be? Is it possible that this guy said that whoever has the hidden fire meridians is the one? That he can take whoever he wants away with him?" Peacock bit her lips and her face turned slightly pale. At this moment, she understood Nun Jingyi's reaction when they first arrived at the small hall, and the meaning behind her words. After thinking for a moment, In asked tentatively, "Sir Hierarch, what do you plan to do?" "What plan?" Nun Jingyi smiled bitterly. "Your subordinate has already called you here. What do you think I plan to do?" Sigh, poor child. In also sighed. Garuda's words make sense. Unless Sir Hierarch has Zhangpinger by your side at all times, with Garuda's lightness skill, it's really easy for him to kidnap Zhangpinger. But I can't even protect a small disciple from the distant fire temple. This makes me feel very ashamed. Desperate times call for desperate measures. Moreover, this is the time for our incense sect to re-enter the martial arts world. If we fall out with the Tenryu sect because of this, the gains will not make up for the losses. Moreover, Sir Hierarch's plan must be an expedient plan. In the future, In could not say what would happen in the future. Chapter 1041. Yes, in the future. What could they do? Zhangpinger had followed Garuda to Heavenly Dragon sect. Not to mention whether Fragrance Cult had the ability to get Zhangpinger back in the future. Even if Fragrance Cult could get Zhangpinger back, would Zhangpinger still be the same Zhangpinger at that time? Seeing that In was silent, Nun Jingyi was also silent. Peacock and Chin were even more silent. Peacock and Chin at this moment were probably more lucky that they were now disciples of the inheritance cult. Moreover, they were lucky that they weren't born with a gift. Sigh, poor Zhangpinger. Chin was silent for a moment and said unconsciously, "First, she was dumped by Yu Zhuochuan, and then she was played by Ren Xiaoyao. Now she finally calmed down, but she was valued by Garuda. Senior sister apprentice. Is this the legendary fate of beautiful women?" "You, shut up." Without waiting for Peacock to speak, Nun Jingyi couldn't help but scold. "Yu Zhuochuan. We don't even know where her corpse is. Besides, there's nothing between him and Zhangpinger. Ren Xiaoyao. Don't even mention him. He's wholeheartedly looking for Xixia. Zhangpinger is just wishful thinking." Chin curled her lips and muttered, "I just think that Ren Xiaoyao is heartless." Thump. Peacock heard it clearly and her heart tightened for no reason. Nun Jingyi ignored her and turned to In. Deputy Temple Master Een has been the Deputy Temple Master of the Flame Temple for many years. I've also been paying attention to you for a long time. You're excellent in all aspects, and now is the time for the fragrance cult to step out into the world. It's also time for you to show your skills. I think it's time for you to change places and take on more responsibilities. Een heard this and was pleasantly surprised. He bowed and said, "Thank you for your promotion. This is the result of your many years of hard work. No need to thank me." Nanjingyi waved her hand and said, "Go and tell Zhang Pinger that on her shoulders is the hope of the revival of the fragrance cult. Her responsibility is also great. Let her remember that as long as she's a disciple of the fragrance cult, no matter where she is, she's a disciple of the fragrance cult. I know this." "Yes, I understand. Moreover, Zhang Pinger's sacrifice today will be recorded in the history of the church by the disciples. Her sacrifice today in exchange for the glory of the incense cult tomorrow will definitely earn the respect of the younger disciples. Her tears will not be in vain." This subordinate understands. This subordinate will explain this matter to Zhang Pinger. Alas, now that things have come to this, we can only face reality. Een agreed and left. When she was far away, Chun called out again, "Sir Hierarch, how can we record this?" Peacock scolded from the side. Chun, shut up. Senior sister, but if this matter was to be recorded in the ancient records, how could Lord Sect Master let bystanders withdraw? Only the two of us are left? Peacock frowned and said, "You and I are the next generation successors of the Order of Incense. Our leader has put in a lot of effort to show us the cruelty of Jianghu and how difficult it is for the female disciples of the Order of Incense to survive in Jianghu. If it wasn't for the circumstances, why would our leader allow her disciples to sacrifice themselves? If we don't harden our hearts, if we don't bear the humiliation, how can the Order of Incense flourish in our hands?" But Chun was still unconvinced. Didn't Lord Sect Master say that? As long as we have supernatural powers that others don't have, won't we still be able to bring the Order of Incense to greater heights? Chun, you still don't understand. If we were the number one person in Jianghu, would we still make such a decision today? If we were flying in the air in front of Rejuvenation Valley, using a flying sword to kill the immortal seniors of Longting Villa, would we still make such a decision? Everything is decided by strength. In this Jianghu, only strength is believed. Hua's soft sound came from outside the hall. Haha. Nanjingyi used her divine sense to scan the area and laughed. All right, there will be a conclusion. We still have to pass the days of the Order of Incense. Let's finish this martial arts convention first. When Nanjingyi led Peacock and Chun back to the main hall of Huayu Palace, the 100 winners had already been decided. The hua sound came from the inner disciples of the Order of Incense handing out the jade bottles containing the Yuhuandan pill, bone solidifying pill, and small revitalizing pill to the 100 disciples. The audience cheered and applauded. To the 100 disciples and their sects, this was already the final victory. It was enough for them to record it in their sect's records. The rest could only fight for glory. The main characters on the stages were not destined to be theirs. After that, the 50 stages in the square slowly returned to the ground. Of the 50 stages in Huayu Palace, other than the 8 stages in front of the main platform, the other 42 stages also returned to the ground. Everyone knew that in the second round of the Sword Discourse, the 120 disciples would compete in these 8 stages to determine the final 8 spots. Sure enough, the 100 female disciples of the Fragrant Religion who were supervising the first round of the Sword Arena went to the middle of the ring. There was already a small hole in the middle of the ring, and these female disciples put the winner's name into the small hole. All right, the first round of the Sword Discourse has already determined the 100 disciples. I represent the Order of Incense to congratulate these disciples. I hope that they can continue to work hard and improve their martial arts to the next level. I hope that they can shine brightly in Jianghu. Nun Xuezhen jumped onto the stage and smiled. Next up is the second round of the Sword Discourse. As everyone can see, there are 8 stages, including the 4 disciples of the Order of Incense, the 4 disciples of the Dalan Temple, the 4 disciples of the Order of Righteous Tao, the 4 disciples of Between the Clouds and the Water, and the 4 disciples of the Tenryas sect. There are a total of 120 disciples competing for the 8 spots. 4 disciples will be selected from these 8 winners. The 4 disciples will compete in the sword discourse. The winner will compete for the top spot of the sword discourse, while the loser will compete for the top spot of the sword discourse. Alright, the Order of Incense will send out 4 disciples and place their names on the stage. The other 4 sects, please also place the names of the disciples from their sects who will be participating in the sword discourse. As soon as Nun Xuezhen finished speaking, 4 people walked in from outside the hall. 1 woman and 3 men. Seeing the appearance of the female disciple, not only was Nun Xuezhen stunned, but all the disciples of the Order of Incense were also stunned. Nun Xuezhen turned to look at Nun Jingyi in surprise. Nun Jingyi nodded slightly. Only then did Nun Xuezhen suppress the confusion in her heart. The 4 people jumped onto the stage and bowed to Nun Jingyi. They said, "We are Hu Ben from the Ruijin Palace, Yang Biao from the Greenwood Palace, Li Yifan from the Thick Earth Palace, Xiaqing from the Distant Fire Palace. Greetings to all the sect leaders." Nun Jingyi waved her hand. The 4 people threw the paper in their hands into the small hole in the stage, and stood at the side of the stage with their hands by their sides. Then 4 disciples from the Order of the Righteous Alliance also jumped out. They were all slightly older. They went onto the stage and bowed. "We are Lu Jihua, Chu Feng Wu Shanghong, and Li Feng from the Order of the Righteous Alliance. Greetings to all the sect leaders." On the stage, Alliance Master Zhang San's face was slightly dark. The corners of his eyes twitched. He knew that while the Order of the Righteous Alliance was famous in the world of martial artists, and had been able to summon the wind and summon the rain over the past few decades, that was just the feeling of a normal sect in the world of martial artists. Compared to the sects beside him, his foundation was far too lacking. Disregarding everything else, the older disciples on the stage might not have been famous in the world of martial artists, but they were already extremely outstanding figures among the next generation of disciples in the Order of the Righteous Alliance. They had come to the Order of the Righteous Alliance this time to let them broaden their horizons, and did not plan to let them show their faces, but the rewards offered by the Order of the Righteous Alliance really moved him. He had been running the Order of the Righteous Alliance for so many years, and every time he thought of the 4 sects of the Immortal Path, he would feel a sense of inferiority from the bottom of his heart. He had been doing his best to search for the remains of the Immortal Path, hoping to find a way to enter the Immortal Path. However, even though he had spent a lot of effort and obtained a lot of secret manuals, jade slips, and so on, he had not been able to get a glimpse of the Immortal Path. This time he was participating in the Order of the Righteous Alliance's Martial Arts Assembly. He really did not expect that such a wonderful opportunity would be placed in front of him. Of course, he also believed that Nun Jingyi definitely had some tricks she did not mention about these 3 items. But who was he? He was the leader of the Righteous Alliance, one of the 3 super sections. He firmly believed that even if Jingyi Nun still had a trick up her sleeve, as long as he could get his hands on these 3 items, he would definitely be able to decipher the secret to becoming an immortal. After the Righteous Alliance, it was naturally the disciples of Between the Clouds and the Water. Bai Yanqiu seemed to be determined to win Between the Clouds and the Water too. He sent 4 disciples, including Liang Zangxiu. At this moment, only the disciples of the Dalan Temple and the Tenryas sect seemed to be particularly relaxed. The disciples of the Dalan Temple stood there cautiously with their palms clasped together. They wore smiles on their faces as they watched the sword competition in a friendly manner. Compared to the rules of the disciples of the Dalan Temple, the Tenryas sect really didn't care about trifles. There were about 20 disciples of the Tenryas sect. They sat at 5 tables, either scratching their heads or resting with their eyes closed. A few of the chairs were empty. No one knew where they had gone. 4 people were sitting at one of the tables. A good-looking woman was holding the hand of a middle-aged man with snow-white hair, who looked to be in his 30s. She whispered, "Little Yaya, who do you think the Heavenly King will send?" "Shu Ajiao, don't talk. Whoever the Heavenly King sends will go. It's not up to us to judge." These 2 people were Qin Shiyue and Su Jiaodong, whom Zhang Xiaohua was already familiar with. The 2 of them were separated from Zhang Xiaohua on the sea. Zhang Xiaohua fell into the sea and naturally had a different encounter. The two of them were also in the competition between the Tenryu sect and the government. They didn't suffer any injuries. The battle overseas only cost them a lot of manpower. When the ships approached, the Jianghu people, led by Su Jiawang and the rest, had the upper hand. Of course, the Tenryu sect didn't want to offend the government too much. Although they knew that the ships that were chasing them had set sail without permission, they couldn't annihilate all of them. They only dispelled their arrogance and swaggered off. Chapter 1042. Qin Shiyue caught Zhang Xiaohua to interrogate her about the pill furnace, which Sakura and the others didn't know about. If Qin Shiyue could get her hands on it, it would be a great achievement. Even if she couldn't get her hands on it, she would have other relics of the way of immortality. Therefore, when she saw Zhang Xiaohua fall into the water, she knew that Zhang Xiaohua wouldn't survive, so she left and didn't mention this matter again. Of course, the power behind Zhang Xiaohua didn't show up later, and there were no clues, which made Qin Shiyue quite sad. As for Su Jiaodong, when Qin Shiyue returned to the Tenryu sect, she also went with her. The flood dragon of the Four Seas was a subordinate of the Tenryu sect, so Qin Shiyue took Su Jiaodong with her. As for the status, who cared about it? Su Jiaodong saw Qin Shiyue scolding her, so she stole a glance at Garuda, who was resting on the high platform with his eyes closed, and said in a low voice, "Little Yaya, I know the disciples of the Tenryu sect don't lack this, but this cultivation method sounds very powerful, and it can be practiced to the way of immortality. Even if you don't mind if you can get it and give it to my father, it won't be a waste of me serving you for so many years." Qin Shiyue frowned. "Jiao, if you want it, I'll ask the Heavenly King for it. We have no reason to mess up the Heavenly King's plan." "So, then who do you think the Heavenly King will send?" This Qin Shiyue looked at the crowd and said in a low voice, "This cultivation method is meaningless to the disciples of the Tenryu sect, who will fight for this useless thing. I guess the Heavenly King doesn't plan to let the disciples fight at all." "Really?" Su Jiaodong's face lit up, and she said, "Then isn't this a good opportunity? If you volunteer to fight, you can make the Tenryu sect famous, and you can also get this secret manual for me. Isn't this killing two birds with one stone? Are you going or not?" Su Jiaodong really acted like a spoiled child. Qin Shiyue was helpless. She looked around and got up and went to the high platform. As Qin Shiyue said, Garuda didn't take this matter seriously, and didn't plan to let the disciples fight. But since Qin Shiyue volunteered and had nothing to do, she nodded slightly. And the four disciples of the Dalan. They were the four disciples of the third generation: Yuan Tong, Yuan Fa, Yuan Yuan, Yuan and Yuanz's Yuan. And Yuan. It seemed like Dalan Temple and Dragon Sect had the same idea. The Tenryu sect was the Tenryu sect, S was S, B. On the sect TTSSST. The Tess. They had to give face to the Tenryu sect, so they nodded. When Qin Shiyue put the slip of paper with her name into the small hole in the arena, Abba Shuizhen patted the arena, and the small hole immediately disappeared. After a while, the 8 arenas were covered by a faint light screen. Nun Shuizhen said loudly, 117 disciples will be assigned to the 8 platforms. For the sake of fairness, disciples of the same sect will not appear in the same platform. As soon as she finished speaking, there was a buzzing sound. 2 lines of words appeared on the light screens of the 8 platforms. They were the names of the 2 people who were going to fight in the arena. The platforms looked very fair. Qin Shiyue, who had just put his name in, was arranged to fight in the first round. When he saw his name, he frowned. When he saw his opponent, he became even more impatient. His opponent was an extremely young disciple from the Tenryu sect. When the disciple saw his opponent's name, he was stunned. He didn't expect to be so unlucky as to meet the Tenryu sect as soon as he got on the platform. Qin Shiyue looked at him impatiently. It was as if he was a fly. If he didn't fly away, he might be swatted to death. Therefore, even though the disciple knew that injuries were prohibited on the platform, he still bowed and said with a smile, I was very lucky to be able to pass the first round. To be able to meet Senior Brother Qin on the platform is a kind of fate. I know I'm not Senior Brother Qin's opponent, so I admit defeat. After he finished speaking, he jumped down from the platform. Well, you're from the Tenryu sect. Not bad. Qin Shiyue commented casually, and jumped down from the platform. Little you are so awe-inspiring. Su Jiaodong pulled Qin Shiyue and whispered with a smile. Shu, you're not afraid of being laughed at. I'm not awe-inspiring. It's the Tenryu sect's awe-inspiring. Qin Shiyue said proudly. There were several more rounds, but they were all very boring. Whenever a disciple from the other sects met a disciple from one of the 5 major sects, they would all jump down from the platform and admit defeat. The only one who did so was a disciple from the floating mountain village. When he met Hu Ben, he saw Hu Ben's tall figure and thought he was clumsy. He wanted to use his superior Qinggong to fight him. If he could gain something, he might become famous in Jianghu. Who would have thought that when Hu Ben swung his copper staff, he would be mesmerized by the sound of the soul-devouring rod? When he regained his senses, the thick copper staff was already on his forehead. He almost collapsed on the platform. His legs went soft and he couldn't even walk. It was the floating mountain village's head who went up to the platform and carried him down. This disciple from the floating mountain village could be considered a lesson for those who came after him. Those who originally had some thoughts of being careful had long since given up. No one dared to challenge the dignity of the 5 major sections. The disciples of the 5 major sects had a smooth journey until the righteous alliance's Li Feng met the Dalan Temple's Yuan Wu. Li Feng was a tall man in his 30s. His weapon was different from the others. He used a white wax spear. When he saw his name appear at the same time as the Dalan Temple's name, he couldn't help but frown. He jumped onto the platform. Among the Dalan Temple's group, a short and thin disciple also jumped onto the platform. He held a very ordinary-looking wooden staff in his hand. Looking at his age, he seemed to be in his 20s. The two got on the platform and saluted each other. Li Feng waved his spear and the red-tasseled spear tip exploded. He called out, "Young Master Yuan Wu, I'm older. I'll let you have one move." Yuan Wu waved the wooden staff in a circle in front of him. He raised one hand and nodded. "Many thanks, benefactorly, for letting me win." As soon as he finished speaking, Yuan Wu didn't hold back and swung the wooden staff towards Li Feng's waist. Yuan Wu was originally a lower-generation disciple of the Dalan Temple. He was lucky enough to be chosen to come to the incense cult. Elder Chongqing made it clear that it was a matter of experience and experience. If he really cared about face, Kong Chan, Kong Jian and the other disciples behind him would have been chosen long ago. Before the wooden staff could get close to Li Feng's body, the sound of the wind could be heard. "Good move!" Li Feng shouted and leaped up like a sparrow hawk. Looking at his Qinggong, it was obvious that his Qinggong was better than Yuan Wu's Qinggong. Yuan Wu's attack was obviously meant to test Li Feng's strength. When he saw that Li Feng's Qinggong was good, he immediately retracted his staff. He was afraid that Li Feng would have more powerful moves waiting for him. Li Feng was disappointed when he saw that Yuan Wu didn't chase after him. Yuan Wu's move was indeed a bait. Once Yuan Wu chased after him, Li Feng would give him a thunderous strike. Unfortunately, he could only land on the ground, turn his spear, and stab with all his heart. There were very few people who used spears in Jianghu. Those who used such a weapon would have extraordinary moves. Sure enough, Li Feng's spear was like a dragon that came out of the sea. It circled around Yuan Wu's body. As long as there was a slight opening, he would be able to break through the door. Unfortunately, Yuan Wu's performance disappointed Li Feng once again. When Yuan Wu saw that he was inferior to Li Feng, he immediately brandished his wooden stick and countered Li Feng's every move. He was not greedy and did not attack recklessly. The saying that the world's martial arts originated from the Dalan Temple might be an exaggeration, but there was some truth to it. Other than the widely spread Arhut fist and Liuha fist, they all originated from the Dalan Temple. Even the Qi Mei staff technique originated from the Dalan Temple. As for the monks of Dalan Temple, their martial arts might not reach the pinnacle, but all of them had excellent fundamentals. This was the same for Yuan Wu. Since he had accepted his position, Li Feng really didn't have any good ideas. If it was under normal circumstances, Li Feng would know that as long as he attacked for a while, this monk would definitely show an opening. However, this was the sword discourse arena, and there was only an incense stick's worth of time left. More than half of the time had already passed, and there were no signs of an opening. Li Feng couldn't help but feel a little anxious. Thinking about Alliance Master Zhang San's warning and his deep gaze, Li Feng clenched his teeth and circulated his energy, thrusting his spear forward. Whoosh! It actually caused the sound of the wind as it pierced straight towards Yuan Wu's face. Yuan Wu didn't dare to be careless. He held his wooden stick horizontally, blocking Li Feng's spear, and lifted it up, raising the spearhead above his head. At this moment, Yuan Wu's eyes slightly looked up at the spearhead. With a slight movement of his hand, Li Feng's hand cracked into 3 parts. Li Feng strode forward and raised the end of the spear with his right hand, as if he was using a 3-part stick. With a whoosh, his wooden stick smashed onto Yuan Wu's wooden stick. Bang! Bam! The 2 sticks collided. A wave of pain came from the area between Monk Yuan Wu's thumb and forefinger. Monk Yuan Wu had received several heavy blows from Li Feng, and his hand was already cracked. This time, Li Feng used all his strength. How could his hands not bleed? Feeling the huge force from Li Feng's 3-section staff, Monk Yuan Wu felt bitter. However, he still forcefully channeled his inner energy and raised his arms to withstand the force. Then he spun his left leg and kicked towards Li Feng's lower body. Seeing that Monk Kong Wu had the intention of attacking Li Feng's weak point to save his weak point, Li Feng understood. He used the momentum to dodge, and pulled out his left hand. With a slight movement of his fingers, a flash of light came out from his sleeve. It was a sharp dagger. Li Feng held the dagger in his left hand and bent his body. He channeled his inner energy and stabbed it towards Monk Yuan Wu's chest. Please vote for me. Please vote for me. Please keep it. Please tip me. Chapter 1043. Monk Yuan Wu's heart sank when he saw Li Feng's dagger stabbing towards his chest. He knew that if he did not pull out his wooden stick, he would not be able to block the attack. However, Li Feng was still holding the spear in his right hand, and he was still holding the spear tip. If he pulled out his wooden stick, he would still be stabbed by the spear tip. Therefore, Monk Yuan Wu made up his mind. With one hand holding the wooden stick, he pulled out his other hand and leaned forward. Facing Li Feng's incoming momentum, he grabbed Li Feng's dagger with his bare hand. Li Feng's attack was very fast. He did not expect Kong Wu to be so reckless. He was stunned. Just as he was hesitating, Kong Wu's hand grabbed the dagger. Immediately, the sharp blade cut Kong Wu's palm and blood dripped down the dagger. Ah! Although the monks of the Dalan temple were calm, they all exclaimed. Even Abbot Changsheng, who was watching from afar, was stunned. Ba! It's not good to have too much anger. Haha, you old monk. This brave monk is bleeding for the sake of the Dalan temple's reputation. How can you say that? I like it. If you don't want it, you can give it to the Tenryu sect. Garuda laughed. The Dalan temple's reputation is not something that can be determined by this sword competition. Even if he loses, what can he do? Elder Changsheng shook his head. Alliance Master Zhang San's face was livid. Kong Wu was just a junior disciple of the Dalan temple, but he had such a strong disciple. He was able to tie with the outstanding disciple he had selected in such a short time. This was something he had not expected. At this moment a voice shouted, "Time's up." Li Feng from the Alliance of Righteous Sects and Yuan Wu from the Dalan temple are both eliminated. Li Feng was anxious when he heard this. When he looked again, the arena was already as high as the ground. This sword discourse was considered to be over. Sigh. Li Feng put away his dagger and spear and smiled bitterly. Little monk, you really wanted it. I admit defeat. Yuan Wu endured the pain and clasped his hands together. The blood flowed down his wrist. He forced a smile and said, "Thank you for showing mercy, benefactor." Li Feng shook his head helplessly as he looked at the high platform. Alliance Master Zhang San's ashen face had disappeared and was replaced by a smile. Thump. Li Feng was startled. He knew that Alliance Master Zhang was beyond furious. But what could he do? With the Righteous Alliance's Li Feng as an example, in the future, no one dared to hold back in the sword conference. As long as they went on stage, they would all use their ultimate moves, afraid that they would be eliminated because of the delay. The monks of the Dalan Temple, on the other hand, seemed to have received instructions from the great master Chang'eng. They no longer fought as fiercely as Yuan Wu. Whenever there was a slightly dangerous move, they would immediately withdraw. If the opponent forced them, they would immediately jump off the ring and admit defeat. But even so, under the mercy of the incense cult and the Dalan Temple, when the winners of the last 8 rings were determined, except for the disciples of the 5 great sects, the disciples of the other sects were all eliminated. Of course, even though these disciples had been eliminated, they were still able to exchange blows with the experts of the 5 great sects under a situation where their lives were not in danger. This was extremely beneficial to their cultivation of the martial Tao. This was probably even more precious than the Jade Restoration Pill. Therefore, even though they had been knocked out of the arena, their faces were still flushed red, and they were in high spirits. There was absolutely no dejection. The 8 disciples of the 5 great sects were Xia Qing and Hu Ben from the incense cult, Liang Songshu He Su, and Chen Yang from between the clouds and the water, Yuan Tong from the Dalan Temple, Qin Shiyue from the Tenryu sect, and Wu Shanghong from the Righteous Alliance. In terms of the number of disciples between the clouds and the water, who went all out and sent out a strong lineup, had 3 disciples who won. Similarly, the Righteous Alliance, who were determined to win, only had 1 disciple. The strength of the 2 sects could be seen from this. As for Xia Qing as an inner disciple, of course her martial arts were much better than the average disciple. It was very normal for her to win. When the list of the 8 people came out, 4 of the 8 arenas were retracted into the ground. The supervising disciples of the fragrant religion sent the list of the 8 people into the small holes in the arenas. Not long after, on the light screen of the 4 arenas, 2 lines of big words appeared. Xia Qing from the incense cult, Qin Shiyue from the Tenryu sect, Hu Ben from the incense cult, He Su from between the clouds and the water, Yuan Tong from the Dalan Temple, Liang Songshu from between the clouds and the water, Wu Shanghong from the Righteous Alliance, Chen Yang from between the clouds and the water. The crowd was in an uproar. Judging from the performance in the sword competition arena just now, Xia Qing's martial arts were very high. She easily won several times. The same was true for Qin Shiyue from the Tenryu sect. Her flexible sword was like a snake, and it was difficult for her opponent to resist. Everyone thought that these 2 would meet in the end. Unexpectedly, they met at the beginning of the competition. For a time, many people surrounded the 2 rings, wanting to see the battle between the peak of martial arts. They saw Xia Qing look at her name. Her expression didn't change at all. She used her Qin Gong from the Tenryu sect and floated onto the ring. Qin Shiyue from the Tenryu sect was also very elegant. She waved her flexible sword like a folding fan in her hand. She took a step and stepped onto the ring, as if she was climbing a very low flight of stairs. Good, everyone applauded. They were all discerning people. Naturally, they knew that the 2's Qinggong was not ordinary. If it was purely a competition of Qinggong, Qin Shiyue was slightly better than Xia Qing. Miss, look at your hand. It's much higher than the others. As far as I know, Lihua Temple doesn't seem to have a female disciple with such high martial arts, right? Qin Shiyue asked with a smile. Xia Qing didn't pay attention to him. She waved her flexible sword and said coldly, "If you think you're not a match for me, you should get off the ring as soon as possible. You're saving face for the Tenryu sect, and also leaving room for both of our sections. Why are you being so long-winded again?" Qin Shiyue was furious and said, "You little girl, I'm just afraid of hurting you. I just want to give you a few words of advice." Without waiting for Qin Shiyue to finish, Xia Qing waved her hand. Her flexible sword was also like a dragon exploring the sea. "Oh, little girl, you're really vicious," Qin Shiyue said, but his hands didn't stop. He used his internal force and waved it. His flexible sword straightened like an ordinary long sword. With a chi sound, it met Xia Qing's attack. Both of them were from famous sects and were well-known figures in their own sections. Their swordsmanship, moves, and mastery of their internal energy were not far apart. They were evenly matched and had met their match. After fighting for half an incense stick's worth of time, the two soft swords had not clashed. Everyone below the ring was dumbfounded. Everyone was calculating in their hearts. If they were in the ring right now, how many moves could they withstand? As time passed, the ring fell little by little. Xia Qing felt that something was wrong. She clenched her teeth and jumped into the air. She shook her flexible sword and slashed it down. "Haha," Qin Shiyue laughed. Wasn't this the move he usually used? So he shook his flexible sword and spun it forward, wanting to entangle Xia Qing's flexible sword. Unexpectedly, just as the two soft swords were about to touch each other, an inch-long faint red light suddenly flashed from Qin Shiyue's soft sword. With a soft sound, the faint red light hit the tip of Qin Shiyue's soft sword, and the tip of the sword, which was about the length of 4 fingers, fell. Sword light! Qin Shiyue gasped and almost cried out. At this time, there were people below the ring who knew what was good for him. Suddenly, the whole ring was noisy, and everyone was amazed. Xia Qing's face was slightly proud. The inch-long sword light on her flexible sword was expanding and contracting, and a red light was moving up and down her flexible sword. On the other hand, Qin Shiyue frowned and looked a little nervous. Although Qin Shiyue was a disciple of the Tenryu sect's Garuda, Garuda was best at Qinggong. Therefore, Qin Shiyue was not as proficient in internal strength as Xia Qing. When he saw that the tip of his flexible sword had been chopped off, he knew that he might not be a match for Xia Qing in martial arts. So he frowned and took back his flexible sword. He reached into his pocket and took out a foot-long thing that looked like an antler. That thing was shaped like an antler and was completely black. It was impossible to tell what material it was made of. Seeing this, Xia Qing didn't hold back and swung her sword again. Qin Shiyue raised his weapon to meet it while chanting. With a chi-la sound, like the sound of a torch being thrown into cold water, the inch-long sword light on Xia Qing's flexible sword immediately shrank when it touched the weapon. Xia Qing's face was full of horror, and she unconsciously took a few steps back. Qin Shiyue grinned maliciously and followed up. She waved her antlers and displayed a strange move, forcing Xia Qing to be overwhelmed. She accidentally touched it again, and the sword aura shrunk a little. As a result, the sword light on Xia Qing's flexible sword had disappeared, and Qin Shiyue became braver and braver as he fought. He stretched out his hand, and the weapon went straight for Xia Qing's throat. Xia Qing seemed to have something wrong with her heart. She covered her heart with her left hand, and wanted to block the antler with the flexible sword in her right hand. However, she was afraid that the antler would break the flexible sword. She had no choice but to roll the flexible sword and stab it under the antler towards Qin Shiyue's chest. The flexible sword was very fast, and seemed to have the idea of besieging Wei to save Zhao. "Go down!" Qin Shiyue shouted and threw out the antler in his hand. At this time, his antler was only about 4 inches away from Xia Qing's throat, and the flexible sword was more than a foot away from him. In any case, it was impossible for Xia Qing to stab it first. However, at this moment, a sudden change occurred. A faint brilliance flashed out from Xia Qing's chest, and a faint light shield blocked in front of Qin Shiyue's antler. With a soft poof, the light shield blocked the antler, and the antler couldn't move an inch further. "Jade talisman?" Qin Shiyue cried out, and immediately tried to use his hand to knock the soft sword away. Who would have thought that before he could use his antlers, another sword light would appear on Xia Qing's soft sword? Although this sword light was much dimmer than before, it was still able to hit Qin Shiyue's major acupuncture point at a distance of 3 inches. Seeing that the flexible sword had succeeded, Xia Qing floated up and kicked Qin Shiyue's chest, kicking him out of the ring with a paw sound. At this time, the time limit for burning a stick of incense was up, and the ring had just fallen to the ground. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for recommendation and monthly. That you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference. as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.